Yeah, it was a map, and it was like front page, across the country, lost our mind, world's falling apart.
I've been in the State House for a year. I still don't know if I'm in the State House.
So, yeah, no, it's in our. So if you're watching Memphis, so one of our major it's like promising, but come on. Yes, the thing I was testifying. They're about to have yeah, it was about the internet.
Both of them are vetting
People have, but now
Hey, Paul! You're law enforcement member.
Charlie, how do we make this work, right? Help me with the language.
Explain sales.
Well, we don't negotiate. I'm still looking for
All places. We're not the center of the every conference. You see sports betting
I struggle with it. I certainly
You're selling it here. I'm like, yeah, you guys. I'm over here. I know a lot about it.
That was the politics side of it. Where are you?
No.
And the opposition was one of
But I've been up here over half
So just using it, so all transactions have to occur within the state. That's the way it's done, like, so we don't get more complex. And they can be incidental occurrences, because you have the internet. You have a Yep, Charlie has a commission. Well, we used to have we used to have one, and then before I got in legislature, I was getting a lot of different channel gaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too sad. Same people doing the same thing. So marketing makes sense. Business process doesn't make sense.
I know, I agree. I agree with you. I have, yeah, occasionally.
Yes,
I know very well. They play basketball. Tall guys. I used to play basketball. It's all fat.
Thanks for,
So what is that gaming?
So, you need to know, you need to actually jog it.
Okay. I just wanted to say all of the
someone says anything.
I get it. I should take
So there, I will make sure. I see this.
Right, so you realize except the legislators, they don't bother coming to talk to you. It's gross. Do this. We have C. They can.
All the time. It's still home.
You come back away.
Where'd you go? Oh, you did? Yeah, I have 2 new knees because of it now, but it's all right. They're great. I'm telling you, I have never, I can swap. You know,
What did you do? I
Charlie. How we doing, sir?
So you came up, I had a job. You live in the hospital area? Okay. Yeah. Right. Did you know? Yeah, okay. Okay, gotcha. No, I hear you. Right now, yeah.
So much. I got 17 years left. I'm on the back and get it. Oh, yeah. Go back.
I'll let you know. I'll get another. So let's fill up this. So I'm with, no, it's my second term. 4 and 5 years. Excuse me. Yes. I'm already working. So I'm at, actually, I'm at, and they all like Carson, sheriff, a lot of they're all in it. Okay, I'm sure you do.
Like a dear friend.
So
Peter, no Nina, no.
And they were I said, I got this way. I said, I want you to. What happened? Right here. I said, back down in front of there. Nice guy. And then my Parsons for the whole school. I said, all right, that's good.
This is the vice president, chief compliance officer. Oh, good, let's only time we'll have a game of
Yeah, well, but it was, we had fun, it was drinking. So it's going well up here.
All of it, the most broad, internet, mobile, book.
The member of the legislature, he wrote the bill, he said the Senate.
Probably never. Easy. So the two names was old, but I got
Charlie, tell me about it. I like conferences like this.
Exactly. Also, like, I left Boston, but I still play for I always want to back at some point. Back in days, I live in Denison. July and August. And so when I go back,
Small little city. 7 miles. 55. Maybe we're going to have meetings all the time with the we haven't met.
No, I want these members to see
We're going to start up. Hi, thank you, Mike McCann.
Hi, Mike. Gail Cameron.
Oh, nice to meet you, Gail. Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate it. Thank you for being part of this. Excellent. How are you?
Great to see you. Crazy girl. Yeah, everything good? Everything good. Everything good. Sorry we didn't talk earlier.
I know. I've been running. I know. I figured I'd see you. So. So thank you very much for coming. Welcome to the University of New Hampshire School of Law and our town hall on the future of regulated sports gambling in New England. I'd like to thank all of you for making the trip to our school, and for those of you who are watching the live stream, thank you for doing so. It should be a great day ahead. I want to begin by thanking the people who are most responsible for putting this event together, and leading off that list is Daniel Wallach. Dan has been, as many of you know, a transformative figure in sports gambling and the law. And Dan and I have partnered on a new online program at our school on sports integrity. We're offering a certificate, and we have at least one student who was here from the certificate program. It's obviously a very exciting time in this industry. I'd also like to thank Mary O'Malley and AJ Kierstead. Both Mary and AJ have been instrumental in the logistics of this event and making it all flow together. So today we will have 3 excellent panels on sports betting and the law as a general topic, and also how the Supreme Court's decision in Murphy versus NCAA last year was a turning point in the topic, where the Supreme Court ruled that the federal ban on sports betting is unconstitutional, thereby allowing each state the opportunity to decide whether and how to legalize sports betting. And there are many issues that go into that decision. We know that 8 states, including, of course, Nevada, which has had legalized sports betting since 1949, have now made sports betting legal. 23 other states are contemplating the decision. One of them is our state, New Hampshire, which is looking into the possibility of having legalized sports gambling. And the questions of whether to legalize is certainly instrumental in the discussion, but I think the next topic of how to legalize and what does that mean? Who can offer a game? How are games monitored? How is integrity ensured? Under what devices can one place a wager? Where do those wagers go? Certainly the issue of the Wire Act will come up today in terms of its relationship to the topic. So I hope that our panels are excellent and informative, and we also hope that each of you participates. There will be time for questions from every member of the audience, if you so choose, and it will be a great opportunity for many of you to meet each other as well. There'll be a reception following the event, and I know many of you will be attending it. So without further ado, I'd now like to introduce our amazing dean, Dean Megan Carpenter. Dean Carpenter became the dean of the law school a couple of years ago, and she has led the school to a rankings increase. We're now top 5 in intellectual property in the law. We are also a top 100 school, and maybe even most importantly, our employment rate. We're 5th in the country if you exclude jobs funded by law schools. We have, if you look at the combination of employment and bar passage, we're really at the top among New England states, and sorry to those who aren't from our school. But a lot of that has to do with great leadership, and that leader is Megan Carpenter, who I will now turn over.
Thank you so much. I would be remiss if I didn't say it's too bad that US News doesn't rank sports law programs, because in that we are truly #1 nationwide. And that's thanks to Dean McCann. He is, I like to think that I'm often talking about our faculty that they don't just talk the talk, that they walk the walk. And that is absolutely true of Mike McCann. He is not just thinking about issues related to sports law all the time and writing groundbreaking pieces on it. He really is at the front lines, at the cutting edge, both academically and creating incredible new programs like the Sports Wagering and Integrity Certificate with students participating from across the country, and providing the same for our students, our JD students here. But also, spending late nights or maybe early mornings sort of around the clock, writing and exploring the legal issues that occur in the world of sports on a daily basis. So I'm really grateful to him for everything he does for the school, and the program that he has created here from scratch. I'd like to introduce Charlie McIntyre right now. He's executive director of the New Hampshire Lottery. And he's also past president of the North American State and Provincial Lotteries and current vice president of the Multi-State Lottery Association. Before he decided to get cool and live free or die, he was south of the border in Massachusetts as assistant executive director and general counsel for the Massachusetts State Lottery from 2003 to 2010. And then before joining the Massachusetts Lottery, he was a senior prosecutor in Massachusetts. And I think your bio says that you were working in organized crime. And I take that from the prosecutor standpoint, not the actual engaged in organized crime.
Then it was hard to tell sometimes.
Mr. McIntyre received his undergraduate degree from Connecticut College and also his law degree from Suffolk, for which we forgive him. I'm sure if you could go back in time, you would do it a little differently. Yeah. And he's also a former competitive triathlete, completing 3 Ironman triathlons, including one, the World Championship, right, in Hawaii. Not too shabby of a place. So I also want to say that, importantly for our discussion today, Director McIntyre is leading the charge for all state lotteries nationwide by filing the first and the only lawsuit challenging the U.S. Department of Justice's recent reinterpretation of the Federal Wire Act as now extending to all forms of gaming, not sports betting, which had been the long-standing interpretation. This case is going to be heard in New Hampshire federal court on April 11th, and we all look forward to following that. We're also truly honored to have him as an adjunct professor as part of our UNH Law Sports Wagering and Integrity Certificate program I was talking about earlier, providing education in this space to lawyers and non-lawyers alike. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're truly honored to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean Carpenter, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks for the school for hosting me and Dan for allowing me to be part of this program. So about 2 weeks ago, I'm in Dublin Airport. And I don't know if you folks have been there or know about it, but you go through customs coming back to the U.S. in actually Dublin. And I'm in line, and I go, Mr. McIntyre, you have been selected for special treatment. And I said to the guy, I go, so apparently this is what happens when you sue the Justice Department. He looked at me quizzically. I said, no, I sued your boss, or the boss to your boss to your boss. And so he said, no, I don't understand. And I hearkened back to a time when I indeed was on the other side of the fence. At least I was in law enforcement, and I didn't toss the plane coming from Dublin, so I knew the drill. And it's remarkable because New Hampshire is now, in large measure, the epicenter for the gambling world. It is the first state folks think of now, which is remarkable given that our size. And the fight we engaged in is not based on some hubris. It's based on a very fundamental principle that the issue of gambling has always been a state decision, whether a state wants to engage in the process or not. Utah has no lawful gambling, 0.0. I would point out that the #1 retailer for lottery tickets in Idaho happens to be on the Utah border. I'm sure it's coincidence. But some other states like New Jersey and Nevada have very robust gaming presences, and that's a decision by the states. And really, when you look at the case that was filed by New Hampshire, it's really that the state of New Hampshire decided to have internet products, internet lottery tickets available. The legislature decided on it, the governor signed it, and it became law. So that decision has always been a state decision. And certainly the process by where the opinion of the Wire Act 2018 occurred, that process versus the process of 2011. 2011, the Illinois Lottery and the New York Lottery specifically sent requests to the Justice Department for opinions, and that was the 2011 basis. 2018, We found out about it when we first read it in the paper. So that was certainly surprising. I would be remiss if I did not introduce my, well, technically co-plaintiff, the New Hampshire Lottery Commission Board Chairman, Deborah Douglas, who is with us here today. With her support and with the support of the governor and the Attorney General of New Hampshire, we actually were the ones first to file suit. And 14 states joined us in amicus briefs or intervening or the like. And if you think about it, states like Vermont and Mississippi both joined on. I mean, they don't agree on much, right? Let's be honest here. It's, Vermont and Mississippi, but certainly in this area they did. And New Hampshire has a proud history. So we were the first modern lottery in the US. In 1964, we started selling tickets. We were enacted in 63. And so this is the first ticket that was sold. It was sold to John King, who at the time was the governor of the state. He didn't win. It's been in our conference room for a number of years. And the funding always goes to education, has for those last 55 years. Ironically, the first money to fund the Department of Education for New Hampshire was from the lottery. Previously, it was locally funded only. But our history goes back even further than that. And our good friends at one of our gaming vendors have a library. And this is the first lottery ticket sold in New Hampshire. This was from 1795. Dartmouth College was funded by a lottery. Actually, it was not one, it was 14. So our commitment to education goes back, obviously, centuries. The first ticket was $3. Anyone care to guess how much that is in today's dollars? About 25 bucks. The first series of tickets was a $25 purchase for $3. And, we say commission, it really acts as a board. My lottery commission acts as a board of directors. Deborah is our chairman. And we act more than just lottery. We actually regulate fantasy sports. We regulate bingo. We regulate charitable gambling rooms. We regulate and oversee horse wagering and simulcast wagering. We handle all legal bets, which I guess is why we're here, because of the illegal ones. As a prosecutor, my favorite way to get into organized crime was through bookmakers. They had to use a phone, and in Boston, they had to pay a gratuity to somebody. They actually had to pay rent for doing business. And it was prevalent. Show of hands, who's ever placed a bet on a sports game? Who's ever played in a bracket pool, an NCAA bracket tournament, football squares, even betting cards, which I grew up in Quincy outside Boston. They were remarkably common there. And so it was like prohibition. And I'll give you an example. I was on a wiretap of one of the biggest organized crime figures outside Boston. And on my desk, it's in March, I get a copy of the bracket pool. Blank. I know what this is for. The office is having a pool for the NCAA tournament. Now, I realize full well that I don't have to explain to the defense bar how I've indicted their clients for sports betting when indeed my office had a pool. So I had to go back and explain to the folks, this has to die now, folks. I can't have this. And the defense bar was able to tell me not the DA's office who won, but the AG's office who won the bracket pool. Such is the prevalence of the activity in question. And further how prevalent it is, was the subject of a number of Boston Herald columns, but we raided a bookmaker and organized crime figure. And he's sitting there as, if you've ever been on a wiretap or a search warrant raid, you give the warrant to the person and say, great, have a seat. You can stay here. You can't do anything. You can't move, but you can watch us. And so it's Sunday. The game's on. The games are all going on. And the trooper starts answering the phone because this is evidence of a crime that they're placing. And he starts giving out lines on games. And he's wrong. He's giving out the wrong line. He's like, oh, Georgetown by 10. And it's the other team by 10. And so the bookie starts yelling at him, for the love of God, I have to make good on those bets. You have to give it the right line, please. And that's one of the benefits about sports betting legislation, about sports betting coming out of the shadows into the light. The activity has been largely underground for decades. What's wagered legally is a tip of the iceberg that is waged illegally. You're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to, I've heard, as high a number of $400 billion per year. And so regulation makes sure everyone gets paid. I tell stories. My staff gets bored of this, but I tell stories all the time. I get a call because I'm the sports betting organized crime prosecutor for the region when I was younger. Guy calls me and says, I didn't get paid this on this bet. I said, okay, first, I need to explain to you Miranda versus Arizona. And I need to give you Miranda warnings because you've just admitted to me you committed a crime. And he won $8,000 parlay from a shop in Barbados, which used to be prevalent, probably still are. And I explained to him after, I'm sorry, it's gone. He goes, well, I want you to prosecute them. I said, I'm sorry, sir. Once you work outside the bounds of the law, you lose the protection of it. So I'm sorry, sir, and I promise not to prosecute you, but please don't be so stupid again to admit the crime to a law enforcement again. And that's one of the reasons for us is to make sure everyone gets paid. The transparency of the state government is complete. If you folks want to, or any citizen in the state wants to see my emails, wants to see my phone calls, they have a right. Every letter I send is public record. And that allows for a transparency and an operation of business. Everyone knows, at least if you gamble in New Hampshire, you know where our office is. You know you can come to us and say, I have a complaint. That'll be taken seriously. Illegal conduct doesn't have that level of consumer protection. And certainly for us, we look forward for it to being a dependable source of revenue like the lottery has. This past year, we passed our major milestone. We just crossed $2 billion in revenue since we started. It's been an important funding source for New Hampshire education. And certainly as a state agency, we enjoy the oversight of both the legislature and the governor on a regular basis, certainly answerable to them on a moment's notice. So sports betting for us has always been the next phase. If you think about it, a bracket pool, and if you think about a squares for the Super Bowl, those are essentially lottery products. And now that they're regulated, now that they're transparent as to how they occur, they can be outside the shadows, within, and everyone gets a fair product. That's what we're there for. So I thank you for this opportunity, Dean. Dean Carpenter, and look forward to the rest of the panels. Thank you so much.
So our first panel will be envisioning the role of lotteries in sports betting. I'm wondering if our panelists and moderator can come on up now to. Sorry, she's on the microphone. You know what I'm saying. Thank you.
Forgot I did that. I know.
Hi, my name is Paul Sternberg. I'm a representative of Spectrum Gaming, a senior lottery consultant. I'm filling in for Joe Weinert. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, so they asked me to fill in for him. And I was very excited because I believe that the lotteries in most states should be the ones who are running iGaming, but more importantly, sports betting. I think they can deliver it with integrity. When you look at surveys of lotteries across the country and public perception, they're always the highest rated, higher rated than government officials, casinos. They're usually in the 70th percentile or higher. So they have a lot of public trust in them. And that's very important when it comes to gaming, because without integrity, you don't have a product. So I'm very happy to be part of this panel. I've worked with Charlie before, Jerry Auburn, who I call the Dean of Lottery Directors. Mark, I've worked with and actually will be on board with him shortly. And also Representative Lang, who I'll let talk shortly because he had a momentous day yesterday. He sponsored a bill, which is great to have an ally in the legislature who sees the value of the lottery and how well they can do it. I'll tell one quick story about Charlie so you know he's telling the truth. When I was at the Mass Lottery, Charlie and I had a wall between our offices. And there was actually a basketball pool going on. And Charlie, as a general counsel, put a stop to it. I can tell you that. He wasn't very popular, but he had to put a stop to it. So he has done that before. He is telling the truth. Yes, exactly.
Learn that now.
Yes. So what I'm going to try to do is go through our questions, and hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions from the audience. I will start with Director Arbin, who I've known, and he's the longest serving director, I believe, in the country from Rhode Island. Have a lot of respect for him, worked with him in Lucky for Life, as well as other aspects of the lottery industry. And let me put my glasses on.
I don't know if I should be that proud of that. I'm the longest serving.
It's a major, when the average lottery director serves probably about 18 months to 24 months. So Jerry, how long have you been?
23 years.
So that says a lot, what a great job he's doing and how well he's respected in the industry. And also Charlie and Jerry are also in the Hall of Fame, the Lottery Hall of Fame, which is a great honor. I wanted to mention that as well. To Director Arbin, how did it come about that the lottery, as opposed to licensed for profit operators, are operating sports betting in Rhode Island?
Well, Paul, by Rhode Island Constitution, all gaming has to be operated, and it's very clear that the word operate is in our Constitution, by state government. Now, that does not say the lottery, but shall be operated by government. Thus, in 1973, 74, when the lottery started, all gaming was put initially under the lottery and has thus since done that. In 1992, we expanded to taking over, allowing video lottery terminals in 2 of our casinos, followed about 5 years ago, tables in one initially, and then a year ago, we did our second casino allowing tables. We totally oversee and operate those facilities. So it was clear that when sports betting passed our legislature and signed by our governor, that it was going to be under the control of the lottery.
Okay, thank you. And then, as I mentioned, Representative Lang, who sponsored a bill, which I believe the vote was yesterday.
It was.
And what was the turnout of that vote?
It was a 3-1 overwhelming vote to pass the bill, 300 and something to 80 something, I think it was.
That's phenomenal. And what made you decide to sponsor the bill, and how did you feel about it, and why you thought the lottery should be the instrument to actually?
So the SCOTUS decision was obviously the impetus for the conversation. Former Representative Bill Ohm and I served on Ways and Means together last term, and so we had an interest in gaming. Charlie is a regular in front of our committee, unfortunately. And so once that decision came out, Bill and I started engaging with Charlie right away with starting to talk about language and how it would fit within the structure of New Hampshire.
Okay, thank you. To Director McIntyre, as we asked Director Arbin, what do you see the advantages of having the lottery operate sports betting as opposed to the state gaming licenses to private or profit?
Well, it certainly is to Representative Lang's. One of the unique situations in New Hampshire is that we're so much more accountable to the legislature than we are, certainly that we were in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, the head of the lottery reports to a joint legislative committee on House and Senate Ways and Means once as to an aspect of revenues, reports once as to aspect of finances, and then never walks in the building again. Whereas Representative Lang will know, we are in the State House during this session. If it's not daily, it's more than daily. And certainly there's a comfort level in terms of our operations, and also there's a level of control that the legislature knows that they have with us in terms of if it goes too far, if we run too fast with the scissors, we'll be called in and sort of asked to say, no, bring that back, do this and this. And so I think some level it was a matter of trust in terms of the last years we've done what legislators have asked and no more, and we have been successful at what they've given us. We launched 2 new products last year, Keno as well as iGaming. The iGaming launch, I think, is the most successful iGaming launch in the U.S. in terms of per capita sales. And so those aspects certainly lend itself towards, okay, they're doing all of the gambling now and it's doing pretty well. We trust them with it.
Which is great, a great track record. Yeah. Lotteries speak for themselves. And also like to add, Mike Sweeney is here, who is the executive director in Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, they don't have iGaming, which Charlie has now, and he's doing a great job with it. And they also, as they say, do not have sports betting. I know it's up for debate. In Massachusetts, the legislature has to, and I'll let Mike talk about that, but the legislature has to approve it and decide who's going to get it. And in my opinion, Mike, the lottery deserves it, from being a former executive director there to how well they operate everything. And also, the most important thing is, if the lottery is running it, the profits are going to go directly back to the state. There are no shareholders. The most money will be generated and sent back to the state if the lotteries are the ones who are running sports gaming. I just wanted to add that.
No, Paul, I certainly think there's an opportunity, like sort of the way Jerry's model is. There's an opportunity for us to sort of be the operator, but certainly to contract out aspects of it so that the profitability as well as the operation is done with the best of the methods.
And that's a great point. Some lotteries are more capable than others. You may license a DraftKings or may license one of the casino operators to come in and operate it for you as well. So that's, but what I'm saying, the lottery should be the
Yeah,
one who oversees
exactly.
it. So Mark Hicker, who was at the end, is involved in the litigation. I'm not sure what you can and cannot talk about. So if I ask something inappropriate, please feel free, which I usually do. Tell me not to. Thank you. Mark, does the new opinion have any effect on sports betting in the United States?
Well, as was mentioned earlier, the Wire Act always applied to sports betting, and that was the one thing that I think there was heated agreement on. But the opinion that came out in January also held or made it expressly clear that the 2006 Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act does not amend the Wire Act. Now, to most people in this room, you probably knew that already because the UGA makes clear that it doesn't amend or affect any other state or federal law. But nevertheless, in the gaming industry, there was a feeling that the UGA presented a spirit of Congress in that it allowed or it carved out an exception for intrastate gaming that was conducted under certain circumstances where there was geolocation, where there was specific provisions to prevent underage gaming, where there was data control. And so there was a view held by many that this, although it did not expressly amend the Wire Act, that Congress intended that the UGA create a spirit that the Wire Act, if sports betting was contained entirely within a state, that the intermediate routing of bets outside the state would be a foul but no harm. That was sort of the view, and it was it was known that in Nevada, for example, where there is legal mobile sports betting, that sometimes the bets would travel across state lines before returning into the state. And there was never a problem from the view of regulators or law enforcement with that. So now there is, first, I think there's uncertainty as to what the opinion means. And hopefully it won't, through Charlie's efforts and the New Hampshire Attorney General and New Hampshire Lottery's efforts, hopefully it will be a short-lived opinion. But there is uncertainty that because of the express language of the opinion, there's uncertainty as to what it means with respect to intermediate routing of sports bets, which means where the bets begin and end within the state, but may, due to the technical aspects of cell technology or satellite technology or internet communication, they may travel outside the borders.
And just to follow up on that, the ruling that just came out that they're all talking about and that Charlie has filed suit on, that also affects lotteries in general, because lottery bets either done through the satellite or cellular, and you have no idea from the bet when it's taking it at the retailer and bounces back to the back end and then back again. We have no idea where it could be going out of space, be going over state lines. So that is a problem with that ruling. It was so broad what they came up with. It basically, if you interpret it literally, you could actually outlaw lotteries, which I assume wasn't the intent, but it's a problem. And that's why it's so important that Charlie has filed this suit and has 14 states on board with it with an amicus brief.
If you look at the amicus brief and the number of states that would have also joined, if the internal processes were not so complicated, the number would have been significantly higher.
Yes. Because
of the tight time for the suit and the fact that we asked for an expedited hearing on the matter, the number of states was limited, but even that, we still had 14 or 15 join us, which was obviously very helpful.
Which was amazing because it was done so quickly. Yeah. It was been 2 or 3 day period. They all jumped on board. And normally you have to go through the Attorney General's office in your state, depending how the reporting structure is. So to get 14 states, as Charlie said, that's a major number, and probably more would have been on board. It was just such a short time frame. They couldn't get everything done. Jerry Auburn, what do you see as the advantages of having the lottery operate sports betting as opposed to the state granting licenses to for-profit operations?
Well, I concur with Charlie. We have integrity. We've been so long established and respected by the citizens of that state that I feel very comfortable. I hear time and time again, and we do have sports betting going on in Rhode Island right now, that we have these extraordinary long lines, at least during Super Bowl time. These people were probably placing bets illegally prior to that or offshore, but they have found it now. They can come out of the shadows and now be able to to place a legal bet wager in the state. I feel that, as Charlie said, was very transparent, the lottery. Our records are totally open. We expose all to whoever asks. And the fact of the trust and integrity is the most important.
I'm going to ask you another quick question, Jerry. How did you get up so quickly? I mean, it was amazing to see how fast and how nimble the Rhode Island Lottery was to be up and running.
Nimble, I don't know, but fast, yes. Well, back in December prior to pass, but this is back in 17, I guess we we started looking at this, and we actually started developing an RFP. And we put an RFP out before it was even rescinded, overturned. And we then moved very aggressively, again, just in our two facilities, our two casinos, that they had to actually allow sports betting in those places. So in November, we actually started the wagers after the World Series, thankfully, because I think we would have lost a lot of money on the World Series, but unfortunately prior to the Super Bowl. And we've learned some lessons as a result of that. But we partnered with IGT and William Hill as our sports book. It was a little challenging at first because there was no other states in the country to look to even to develop the RFP. It was challenging in that sense. And we actually reached over to Europe with William Hill and got some very good consultants to help us through the process. So our next step is to, and we did it in phases, Paul. We only did it initially face-to-face with a teller at the facilities. Tomorrow morning, we start kiosks in the facilities, and followed by, right now in our state, Senate and House has passed statewide mobile. So we anticipate the governor signing that bill, and we hopefully be up and running by the fall on mobile.
That's great. Representative Lang, the bill that just passed would not only allow betting on college sports events played in the state, would not allow betting on college sports in the state, but would allow betting on New Hampshire sports teams playing outside the state. Could you comment on this?
Sure. So there was an amendment to that got passed through in this last one.
Yeah.
So it allows for, if it should ever happen, that New Hampshire colleges are participating in tournaments, NCAA or whatever else, tournaments, that those bets would be allowed in tournament based, but on a one-on-one, just one-off game, the goal was not to allow that. New Hampshire's a fairly small state, and having access to students is not that difficult. I had dinner with some of the basketball team at UNH over in Durham. So the idea was we wanted to restrict that kind of access to make sure there were no shenanigans that could potentially happen and have any kind of those. So we felt it was best to just cut it off at the knees, make sure it couldn't happen.
Very wise choice. Yes. Charlie, how many brick and mortar agents do you envision if sports gaming comes into reality?
I mean, certainly, there'll be more of a market-based decision. I would imagine it depends on my neighbors.
Okay.
I'm certainly not Rhode Island. We're good, Jerry.
Although we have a lot of New Hampshire plates in our
I saw firsthand when I visited, in all candor, the lotteries, we share lots of information. And so when I visited Jerry Albin a couple weeks ago in Rhode Island, we visited the sports books there, saw the license plates, who was driving to Twin Rivers to play, and it was in the sports book playing there as well. Mm-hmm. And honestly, part of the discussion we had with Representative Lang related to entry into tournaments was a direct result of my conversation with Jerry about you don't want to stop a tournament just because one state happens to make it into the, they win their league and they're a 15 seed. Likely to lose to a 2 seed, you don't want to block the entire tournament. We won't take action on that game, obviously. Right. But the overall tournament. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Oh, just how many brick and mortar?
Oh, yes. So the market based. I'm sorry, market based. So if Maine and Vermont would pass such, it will depend. And if Mass doesn't or does, that'll depend. We often suggest that if there's a donut hole on the very southern border of New Hampshire, on the top of that donut would be 600,000 people. On the bottom of that donut would be 1.5 million. Okay. So I use this line all the time is that retail behavior doesn't care about geography. No. If across, liquor stores sell $500 million in gross revenues in liquor because the prices are so markedly cheaper. And so a lot of our customers, half their revenues are out of state. So similarly, depending on what they do, depending on what the market would bear.
Okay. And real question for you, Jerry. Are you seeing a lot of cross-border sales? Are you seeing Massachusetts, New Hampshire, or Connecticut people crossing over to play?
We did extraordinary numbers of out-of-state players more so during the Super Bowl. And we're starting to see that right now with March Madness. We anticipate tomorrow to be extremely busy, very similar to what we saw Saturday before the Super Bowl Sunday, the Friday and Saturday. So we're going to be running this for about 2 or 3 weeks time. Once the brackets were selected, we saw a small uptick yesterday, but and today, and the numbers will be strong tomorrow. So to answer the question, yes, a lot from Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Connecticut.
Right, because I've seen a lot of, from being from Massachusetts, I see a lot of advertising for Twin Rivers and your other facility about that. So, all right. To Mark at the end. Let me just find my question for you, Mark. I don't want to be forgotten about. Are lotteries conducting sports betting in other U.S. states? And does that surprise you? Obviously, we know that Jerry is doing it. What other jurisdictions are doing it? We know.
Well, I am surprised that the lotteries have taken a leadership role. I'm pleased also for the reasons that Charlie and Jerry have mentioned, that the lotteries have been selected in West Virginia is a state where the lotteries are in charge of monitoring sports betting there, and there are a number of bills pending where the lottery would also be in charge of monitoring, if not operating. Delaware, for example, is another state where the lottery oversees the sports betting. Delaware has been conducting sports betting of a type for longer than for many years, because they were one of the states that was accepted out of the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, because they were conducting a form of sports betting before the enactment of that law. But it was only a parlay bets that they would accept, and now they have full-on sports betting. What I do think is particularly unique about lotteries conducting sports betting, though, is that you can actually have a bad day with sports betting, as opposed to a lottery where if you, as all these experienced lotteries do, you conduct it correctly, you're always going to win. But bookies can get it wrong on occasionally, so lotteries have to adjust, and they've adjusted very nimbly to with the help, I think, of other industry experts, as Jerry mentioned, William Hill. But it certainly is possible in sports betting, unlike most other forms of gaming, that the house can lose. But over time, if it's done correctly, sports betting is a profitable endeavor for the bookmaker if they're running it correctly.
Okay, thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, and this goes to either Jerry or Charlie or both of you. Responsible gaming, which is a core value of all lotteries across this nation. Have you put safeguards in place or done anything to address to make sure that people don't fall in or get trapped into a problem? And if there is, they do end up having a problem or develop a problem, there's a way to help them? Which
certainly for us, the sports betting language, Representative Lang, contains currently a council for responsible gaming that's fully funded, actually more than they asked for originally for funding mechanisms. And also our iLottery platform contains limits in terms of how much you can play and wager, and also contains a self-exclusion function that can't be undone. So for example, if you want to exclude yourself from our iLottery game platform, you're excluded, and that ban lasts as long as you put it in for and can't be undone. So certainly we've had folks take advantage of that, and we don't want the stories that are a problem.
Right.
It's bad for our business. We want the vast majority that have no issues. We don't want the folks who have difficulty or problems.
Yep.
And it's very similar to what they're doing in New Hampshire. We're not mobile yet, and once we do, the safeguards will be in place. Very similar to limit the amount of time on the device, limit the amount of time you can wager. Pop-ups to tell you, you're maybe at a dangerous point, and obviously the self-exclusion portion of that also. So it's very similar.
Okay, thank you. Representative Lang, from reading the bill, unless it's changed from when I saw it, the bill would allow up to 10 brick and mortar retail establishments, which could be co-located with other commercial businesses or general commercial retail locations. Do you envision this to be an opportunity for bars and restaurants like Buffalo Wild Wings?
So yeah, so when I first were looking at language, I was working with Charlie. We had just recently passed Keno, and when I talked to Charlie, we talked about making the sports betting bill in alignment with some of the same provisions as our Keno betting. So things like local control. So towns have to have a say in whether or not they want to allow retail sports lottery, retail sports betting locations. And so that was the first hurdle, is the town has to say yes. And then if there's a location within the town, we want them to have that opportunity to be able to offer that. To my knowledge, there was only one location out on the Seacoast that's currently interested in doing that actively came up to us and talked to me about the provision in the bill. We felt it was an important part of, New Hampshire is a big tourism state. So it's a big aspect of that, of bringing and making it a whole, afternoon, if you will, hanging out and, enjoying the games, enjoying meals, and betting on your favorite teams.
Which is important, bringing in outside revenue other than from the state, which is very
Correct.
important. So, okay, thank you on that. Jerry, as sports betting is a considerably different type of gaming than traditional draw lottery games and scratch-off tickets, how did the Rhode Island Lottery developer acquire the necessary sports betting? And you answered some of this already, sports betting expertise.
Yeah, and back to what Mark said, how different it is. It is totally different, and you have to have very thick skin and be prepared to lose a lot of money in any given day, and obviously make money. But in the long run, you're going to balance out. We did again utilize the skills of Spectrum, and again, most of the information came from overseas. Where Europe, they've been doing this for some time, and we used their expertise. And then, we learned, we sent people to Delaware, although they were just doing parlays at the time, parlay betting. We had the assistance of the Delaware Lottery. We also started to look at New Jersey very closely, as well as Nevada, of course, which is, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Nevada's been doing this for so long, and their business model is very good. So it was a steep learning curve for all of us, because we didn't know anything about sports betting, but it is doable. I assure you of that, and we feel very comfortable with it now. Even though each day we're learning something new, and there's a new chapter every few weeks in our state and how we're progressing with the games, but there is the opportunity. Back to what Mark said, it's not like a scratch ticket. It's not a guarantee or a Powerball ticket where you're going to get guaranteed revenue. There are going to be days that you lose an awful lot of money, and have to be prepared for that.
Okay, thank you. Mark, could you explain the issues that have arisen between state legislatures and the professional sports leagues regarding royalty rights and exclusive data? Excuse me.
Sure. The leagues in Nevada, where sports betting has been going on since 1949, do not get compensated other than for the use of their trademarks, which you may see if you go to Las Vegas and you sit in a sports pub and you're sitting in the Washington Redskins seat or the Patriots seat or so forth. But with state legislatures now considering sports betting, several states have already passed it. The leagues initially were seeking what they were referring to as an integrity fee, a piece of the total handle, the total amount wagered. Originally in Indiana, they were seeking an amount of 1% of the total amount wagered, which would have translated in Indiana to about 24% of the gross gaming revenue, which is revenue after payment of prizes. And the leagues were justifying this ask, saying that we would need now, with the expansion of sports betting, to put greater effort to keeping the games clean. That reasoning was criticized. Well, you should want to keep the games clean on your own, because if there was any suspicion that the games were not clean, you'd lose viewership, you'd lose advertisers, and so forth. So that characterization of the fee has morphed into a royalty, which is perhaps a more true characterization that the leagues want a piece of the action, because in their view, and this is certainly a fair characterization, it's their product. And their view is that if there weren't NBA games, there would be no betting on NBA games. Same with football and baseball and so forth. And There's some irony to this because for so long the leagues were opposing sports betting, and then the Supreme Court strikes down the PASPA last May, and now they raise their hand and say, well, yeah, we'd like a piece of the action. So there's some irony there. In New Jersey, which spent millions of dollars in fees, legal fees, and otherwise, and an effort to bring their suit. Remember that this was the second challenge, or perhaps the third challenge. The first time the Supreme Court denied cert. The second time they granted it, to the surprise of many. So New Jersey was having nothing to do with the league's request for an integrity fee or royalties. And so far, to my knowledge, although Dan is certainly more expert on this than I am, but to my knowledge, no state legislature has passed, or there's no sports bill yet that has been enacted that grants a royalty to the leagues. But they are back. I would be very interested in your experience, but they are certainly seeking a participation.
And I agree with your opinion. And one of the things I find ironic is if the leagues are making an integrity fee or they're making something off of sports wagering, my issue would be, and I think a lot of people would agree, if let's say a game comes down to last minute, and whether it's a shot or a field goal or something is missed and it throws the line one way or the other, the league has nothing to do with it, but it brings their integrity into question. Did they have something to do with it? Because you always hear people say the games are fixed, they want it to go 7 games, and people always say that. However, if they're making money off it, it brings that into the question, even though it's not true. So it's better, in my opinion, just to be clean. They're going to make the money off of advertising revenue, increase viewership, and I think that's where they benefit from it. I understand the point, but I think they benefit just from being sports gaming and people being allowed to wager on games. Will have more interest in TV, broadcast rights, and things along those lines. I don't know if any of you have a comment on that, or.
I agree with you, Paul. They certainly, what we're seeing is they're embracing the sports betting because they realize how much revenue they can generate just by more people, more viewers on the games. It's keeping the younger demographics engaged, and it's only going to grow in this country, exponentially. And there's obviously great opportunities for them to make much more money as a result of it.
Representative Lang, was there any pressure at all, or it didn't come up at all when you were writing the bill?
It didn't come up once in our committee at all, or anywhere along the line in our bill that I was aware of.
Oh, that's great, because I know in D.C. they had a lot of issues. D.C. voted to allow the lottery to do sports gaming, and there were certain leagues were looking for an integrity fee, and there were a lot of issues over that. When all was said and done, the city, in their infinite wisdom, decided to not pay any integrity fee, but to allow the lottery to operate it. And I guess negotiations are ongoing right now on that front.
I mean, Paul,
Yeah.
I would expect the jurisdictions that have the most sports teams in the jurisdiction to have the most issues.
Mhm.
Like you're going to see in California, where there are a dozen
Right.
professional sports teams, they'll have more influence than
Right.
so for New Hampshire, where there are none.
Yeah.
Where DC has 2.
I think to your point, New York, which is the site of the headquarters for some
Yeah.
of the leagues, is
Of course.
getting some pressure.
Yeah, I think they have 11 professional sports teams in New York State. So you're going to, and they're a very large employer in the state, obviously, for that reason. So.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Charlie, quick question. Will you be using an RFP process to select vendors? And can you explain how that will work, or if you formulated it, or you're not ready to talk about it, or?
I don't know, John. What are we doing?
Sorry, I didn't mean to-
Yeah, no, certainly. The language in the bill is there's an RFP process we'll do to find all of the vendors we would use for this purpose, just like we do now. We wouldn't do this in-house. It would be foolhardy to do it. We would select appropriate vendors, and I use the word plural intentionally, to engage in this process. Our role in this is to sort of maximize revenue, regulate it appropriately and fairly, and to the extent possible, use it as a generator of economic growth for the state.
Okay.
So that'll be our 3 main goals.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mark, and if you can comment on this again, what impact, if any, will the New Hampshire lottery lawsuit against the DOJ have on mobile sports betting throughout New England, excuse me, but isn't it just a case about lottery ticket sales?
Well, I think that the lawsuit hopefully will be successful and will clarify that the Wire Act applies only to sports betting. And again, hopefully it will have nationwide effect because as Charlie's mentioned, while New Hampshire's the leader in bringing the suit, there are a number of states who are in support of that effort and hoping that the decision will come quickly and will be clear. But I do think that one need only look to Pennsylvania, which responded to the Wire Act decision and changed their policies with vendors, requiring them to bring all their equipment within the state, whereas prior to that, they had been more flexible and allowed vendors to put servers in New Jersey. This is with respect to non-sports betting. Now, with respect to sports betting, I think, again, we don't know, but I think there may be increased scrutiny on what the Wire Act provisions are. I do, however, believe that the issue of intermediate routing is a really thorny issue, and I think with technology today, it would be, in my view, unwise to enforce a view that intermediate routing violates the Wire Act, because it certainly wasn't the spirit of the Wire Act. If I could just take a second to tell you what you probably already remember, is that the Wire Act was enacted to assist states in enforcing their laws with respect to organized crime. It wasn't enacted to thwart states' gaming policies. And if the Wire Act is being used as a hurdle or as a speed bump to sports betting, that would be contrary to what its intended purpose was.
Thank you. Charlie, as you know, HB, the House Bill 480, provides that you must be 18 years old, minimum age, to place a wager. Do you know if that's consistent across the country or what you've seen around the country?
I don't. And certainly it was debated whether to go to 21 or 18. But the vast majority, I think the opinion was 18 was sufficient in terms of age cutoff.
Okay.
And 18 is what they went with.
That's right. And that's what lottery is now.
Yeah, it's what lottery is now. It's age control. And every one of our products is an age controlled environment and would be sold in an age controlled environment. Okay. So, and we test and we check and we, as you know, we have compliance department, we have investigators. If there are issues, we follow up and accordingly.
Representative Lang, was it a heated discussion, or did 18 seem fine with people, or were there a lot
No,
of
because we placed the regulation component underneath lottery. 18 was an accepted standard by the committee and by most of the individuals I spoke to.
Okay, great. Okay. Right. I'm just trying to think if I covered all my questions. I'd like to open up for questions from the audience, if anybody has any questions from the audience.
Yeah, so have you guys done any studies into the demographics of what a typical sports lottery participant or bettor would look like? I'm thinking age group, social status, income, for instance. What are we looking at in demographics?
I can tell you what they look like. I can't tell you what their income is, though. I shouldn't say what they look like. That's very general. But it does appear to be heavily skewed between 30 and 50-year-old male, heavily. What their economic, we have not done any research relative to that, though. But it does, very few females are in line to place wages. What reason, we don't know.
Certainly we did research a number of years ago. We found an over-indexing for sports betting and lottery players. So if you like to gamble, you like to gamble. And certainly we saw the same thing. We saw it skew male as well. Although the research is a little odd because in theory they were answering yes to a crime. Because at the time sports betting was illegal, so they were answering a question that they probably shouldn't have answered, but they did. And for my friend here, answer my friend. But it's really the same experience. You saw it skew male, 35, 55.
The core lottery audience.
The core lottery, your core lottery player. Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
This is for Charlie, the representative Lang. Did you guys discuss the kiosks at regular retail locations? Or so 7-Elevens and that nature to put sports bets there? Have you also discussed mobile sports betting lots in New Hampshire where people can drive across the border, sit in a parking lot, place their bet on their mobile phone, drive out of state again, and then cash their check back in?
Well, certainly so our lottery platform currently, you can be in state and register. For example, our second biggest business in the state is tourism. The Lakes region fills up in the summer with folks enjoying the lakes and not the traffic of Boston. And so you're through your phone able to play through that because the phone has a geolocation function, which is hyper robust. So you know that the wager is being placed internally to the state. Whether or not you're a citizen of X or Y, you still can play like you can currently. You can be a citizen of Utah, play Powerball in New Hampshire if you're on vacation, cash your ticket and go back to Utah, given by the sovereign law. So similarly, there's never thought to lots. It was more, if you're in state, you can legally conduct a business that the state allows you to conduct currently.
So yeah, that would be, so to talk about your retail location question. So yes, that was exactly the idea I had in my mind, was the ability for, poor locations or sports bars or that one to do those kind of things. It's, again, similar to the line of our Keno model that we used, was that once those if the bill passed and things were going on, that they could make arrangements with the lottery to have those kind of kiosks if that was the way they chose to go. But we definitely didn't put it hard into the law because, again, we weren't projecting out what that was going to look like. And, Charlie's point, it was a heated discussion about geofencing and about making sure we can make sure that the transaction begins and enters or ends in the state of New Hampshire. And I think the technologies are definitely there as a technologist, as I do my real job, that the geofencing is definitely there to allow that kind of functionality.
Vending machine model as we have a lottery ticket vending machines.
Yes.
That would be my anticipation.
Yeah, that's literally what's anticipated currently, yes.
Kathy?
Can you remind me, New Hampshire, Rhode Island allows for gaming with credit?
We don't. Our lottery platform is debit or its equivalent. So like ACH, PayPal, those, yes, but not credit cards. No.
Relative to the traditional lottery, we do allow credit debit. We don't get a lot of credit because the fee associated to it. So a lot of retailers will not take credit. If someone's buying a Powerball ticket in a liquor store and spending $80 on liquor, they will probably take the credit card. In our facilities right now for sports betting, we only allow cash. When we go mobile, we will allow debit, but not credit.
And I will say that was a particular conversation that occurred on the bill that passed the House. And it specifically does not have credit in there. As Charlie said, all the other models are referenced, PayPal and debit card and cash, but we specifically excluded credit cards for that very reason.
We're very, very concerned about credit cards.
Yeah, I mean, it's cash, it's equivalent. Really is what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And Mark, I'm not sure if you would know this. I believe in Vegas and Atlantic City, you have to have cash when you go to place a wager. There is no credit card.
It's cash.
Yeah.
As you know, some high rollers get extended credit when they
Right.
check in.
They have an approved credit line they can draw down
Right.
on.
So-
Right. Okay. All right. Yes?
I know it's a thing in the past, but just out of curiosity, do you know what the rationale was behind Delaware only allowing parlay betting? That just seems weird.
So yeah, Mark would know that better, but yeah.
Well, there were several court cases that restricted them to parlay betting, but the parlay betting was they were conducting that during the windows that the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act provided when it was enacted in 1992. They made some efforts to go beyond parlay betting, and those were challenged by the NFL successfully. So they were limited to parlay betting until the Supreme Court's decision striking down the pass for this past May.
And Jerry might be able to comment on this, but I believe parlay betting is much more profitable than straight up betting on a game.
It is. And
that's
Delaware
where they-
still experience a lot more parlay bets than straight bets right now. They've gone to straight because their customers are so used to playing parlays, and that's really where the money is. It's it's much more profitable if your customers all play parlays.
Right. It's far more profitable from what I've seen. Straight bets are minimal profits, but the parlays can be anywhere from 17 to 30%, depending on whose model you use. And that's a big difference than being in the single digits for a straight on wager. Yes?
In Rhode Island, have you done any projections out on where you see the revenue streams by percent, mobile versus casino-based?
Well, we're looking at New Jersey, obviously, and mobile, who's done very well. I think they're doing 75 to 80% bets are coming off mobile. So hopefully we're going to experience very similar. And very similar to New Hampshire, we have a lot of tourism in the state. The drawback we're going to have, or one of the provisions we put in, we recommend to be in the bill, that you had to actually go to the facilities, to casinos, and to register. We weren't going to just allow you to register on your phone from a remote location. You have to go in the casino. We want to see our ID. We want to see who you are. We want to make sure you have not been excluded from the casinos in the past. And we want to make sure you are who you are, and track it that way. Once you do that, once you establish your account, you can freely, transfer money into your account, though. But we have not. We're hoping to experience that kind of revenue. We need to relieve. We have such a overflow of people right now that it's very concerning. We had up to an hour and a half wait in line with 14, we call them tills. These are places windows where you put the place of wager. An hour and a half wait during the 2 days prior to Super Bowl. Hopefully, again, the kiosks are going in tomorrow. The biggest challenge we had, one of the biggest challenges we had, was the learning curve for both the teller, who didn't know how to take a wager, and the person making the wager, who didn't know how to do that either. So they were both. It was challenging on both ends. So we could train the tellers, we could teach them, but until you get into live taken bets, it was very, very challenging. And the same we're going to experience with kiosks tomorrow. We're putting in 17 kiosks into our biggest casino, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to create problems. We're still going to have bottlenecks, and we anticipate, such strong turnouts in the next 3 weeks.
Are there any? Yes.
In terms of HB 480 that had just passed, what's the sort of prognosis from here in terms of the legislative process and where it might go?
Sure. So the next step is that it's going to be over in the House Senate. And with my conversation with the senators, it seems like it has strong support there as well. As you know, our governor came out in support of it and put it in his budget. So I would anticipate a pass. I'm not sure where they may want to go on amendments, but right now it sounds like it will pass through in some form.
Mike?
Just curious if either Mark or any of the other panel members have explored any avenues to try to mitigate the loss risk on the sports betting side, whether through joint liquidity pools or anything of that nature. Obviously we have a unique situation here in New England where you have major sports teams who have a history of success and a very loyal sports base, fan base, so they're always going to be betting on that particular team. It really creates a heavy dynamic occasionally against the house.
Mike, it's a good question, and we really wrestled with that before the Super Bowl because we were realizing 85% of the bets being placed were on the Patriots. So they're coming in, they're betting with their hearts, not with their minds. I'll give you a quick story. So to answer your question, we did not do that. We wanted to keep the line as close as what was being offered in Vegas. We debated that question: should we move the line? It was initially at 2.5. It stayed at 2.5 in New Jersey and in Vegas. We were at 3, hoping to give ourselves a little edge. We considered moving it higher, again, to protect ourselves a little more and hopefully move people to start to bet on the Rams. But we chose not to do that. We want to be very competitive, not only with the other states or the jurisdictions, and we're going to be very competitive with Mass and Connecticut comes online too. We have to be very similar. But we also were very concerned about what's happening on the street. Again, these long lines of people were probably placing bets illegally before. We want them to continue to place them legally and not to go back to their bookie because they have a better line. Quick story in New Jersey, and I've told this several times, so if you've heard it, I apologize. The line was 2.5 points. I'm sorry. We were 3. We were given 3, and New Jersey was given 2.5. There was an individual male who was very prosperous, and he did very well. He wanted those 3 points. So he drove up to Rhode Island from New Jersey rather than place this wager in New Jersey and took his backpack into the casino, placed $352,000 on the Rams, and lost. thankfully. So there is, but when that takes place, there is a mechanism that takes place. We just don't accept that wager. The bells and whistles start going off, and there's calls made to Vegas and to our bookmakers, and it's very interesting. When you go to Vegas and see the bookies, they're all in a room, and they're taking all these calls, and they're all middle-aged or older-aged guys, and scruffy-looking individuals, but they're the back room of the bookmaker, protecting us and evaluating whether they're going to take the wager. They knew this individual. They knew who the individual was, and we have a process now of giving people identifiable numbers so they can tell us when they want to place a large wage, and we can converse with Vegas, and they will give the green light or say, no, cut that down, or raise the line on that person if we think it's too big a risk.
Do you have limits in place of what a wager?
$10,000 right now, and then we can fluctuate that.
Yeah. Okay.
It's sort of a trade-off. How much flexibility do you want to give to your vendor consultant that's providing the odds, and what sort of indemnification are you going to impose on them? So I think you can contractually protect yourself as a lottery, depending on how much flexibility you're willing to give your odds maker, because obviously you've engaged them because they're experts. And so if they're experts, and if they have a piece of or if, depending on what their compensation structure and all that is, you might be able to work something out. One of the difficulties is that one of the difficulties that the Wire Act causes is that you can't lay off bets. So in Nevada, it doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen that books can feel that they're out of balance, and they lay off their bets with another book. But when you have in Massachusetts maybe 2 facilities, I don't know there's several possibilities with the bills that I've seen, but it's just you have to keep the bets within the boundaries of the state, and that reduces the flexibility that you have.
It actually even happened when I was a prosecutor, where I don't know if you remember the Patriots and the Packers Super Bowl. Well,
Sadly.
Yeah, sadly, yeah. The street line in Boston was 13 points against the Patriots. The Vegas line was 15 against the Patriots. And they scored ended up being 14. So every bookmaker in Massachusetts who had an account in Nevada and laid off all their wagers to Nevada on the Patriots collected both from the bettor and Nevada. So essentially, they won every single bet that they placed. And so that's when Jerry talked about middling lines, and certainly the point or 2 points, that's the fear you end up in, is worried about those type of situations.
And it wouldn't have made a difference with the Patriots, obviously. No. But what it does for those now involved in sports betting, it takes the fun out of watching these games, because all you're doing is you're just thinking how much you're going to lose, or how much you're going to win. I wanted the Patriots to win by 2 points. That's all. But they didn't.
Missed that extra point.
For the representative, did you say that during your process you weren't contacted by any of the leagues?
I was not contacted by any of the leagues, and I don't believe any of them came to committee to do any kind of testimony at all.
It seems like the 3 lawyers who represented here, that long-term relationships with all the teams, that they would support the lotteries and want the lotteries to be a part of it. So it's kind of, I don't know, Director Alvin, if they were involved in Rhode Island.
I do think Charlie's point is probably the most accurate, was that the fact that New Hampshire has no professional sports teams. So I'm not sure there was very much interest in having a conversation with us.
They certainly, we had discussions, the NBA, NFL, certainly, but it never went very far in terms of wanting impacted in the bill and the like.
Yeah, I mean, they came in early because we were early to, in the game. So they made their presentations to NFL and NBA. But it didn't fly and didn't hold any water. So, but I have a conference call with the NFL this week, again, just to reintroduce and get the conversations going, because there is concern. I mean, they're all concerned about their players and so forth, and the employees, and this, as this starts to expand across the country.
Yes.
Are we going to ever see a regulation Of fantasy sports and sports gambling meet and come together, or do you all think they're going to remain separate?
So we regulate fantasy sports now, and really it's related to the operator of the fantasy sports and making sure they're doing what they say they do to the customer. It's a very different for the purposes of sports betting, only because fantasy sports tends to be a little bit lighter player, tends to be more of a casual player versus sports betting can be like it's hard to manipulate a fantasy sports product because you have to so many outcomes. You're talking 8 or 7 or 9 outcomes versus a sports betting where you're talking one off, and that gets even scarier when you're talking one player versus one player. You know, like a tennis match, for example. That's a scary situation because it can be so. I'm talking one person versus fantasy sports, where it's lots of teams and lots of players in those teams. But yeah, they certainly act the same way, and I think the DraftKings FanDuel folks, their databases are full of folks who are interested in sports betting.
Provisions in your contract with these third-party providers to protect your cell phone number from sports telemarketing agencies?
Yes, there is. Yes, we will not allow that. Absolutely.
Yes.
I know minor league betting is hard to come by, but both Rhode Island and New Hampshire have prominent minor league baseball and hockey teams. Would you ever consider taking sports bets on that, or would it be similar to how Major League Baseball asked the states not to take bets on spring training?
We were asked by Major League Baseball not to take bets on spring training. And we, along with Vegas and Delaware, said, no, thank you. We have very, very little wages put on spring training, and there are controls in place. I'm not sure the concerns of Major League Baseball, other than maybe, again, they want to have a voice. But we have not restricted from minor league baseball right now. You will be allowed to bet on minor league. The only thing is you cannot bet on in-state colleges.
Any other questions? In closing, one of the things I like to say is it's a very hot topic across the country. Spectrum Game is actually involved in several studies. They're also out to bid for several studies. Most states who don't have it are taking a look into it, iGaming as well as sports betting. I believe North Carolina and Virginia are going out to bid. I know I'm finishing up with Spectrum a study in Louisiana, taking a look at all aspects of it. And there were actually 7 points in Louisiana to the bid, looking at everything from lottery to sports betting to placement of casinos. So it's another place where the states needing a lot of revenue are looking to sports gaming, and it needs to be done right because of the integrity and because of people's lives are at risk and because of problem gambling. So there are a lot of studies going on. It's a very hot topic. I expect it to continue depending on the court case. That could change everything. Obviously, this could all be for moot, but I doubt that. I have a lot of faith in Charlie, and it is a lot.
I know where Deborah and I are going to be. April 11th.
Yes.
So, I think I got my seat. I'm
right.
sure who else has seats, but
yeah, but that's really important. And Mark, do you have anything to add? Does anybody else have anything to add?
Well, I just would say, as you said, that the action will be in New Hampshire on April 11th. Certainly, that suit, I think, New Hampshire has established itself. Not only was it the first lottery, but it was the first to sue in respect of that decision. I think it will be very, very interesting, and a lot of eyes will be on New Hampshire to see how that turns out.
And a lot of states took a look at it, thought about filing suit, but they deferred to Charlie and his experience. And this is a compliment to Charlie. I very rarely give it to him, but they respect him a lot.
Very rarely.
Very rarely. And they all held off.
What was my nickname?
Yeah, I'm not going to say it in public.
Well, obviously the sales prevention team.
Yeah, sales prevention team when I was at the Mass Lottery. But they have a lot of respect for Charlie in the industry. And they did not file suit. They did the amicus brief, and they're letting Charlie lead the way, which says a lot about your director in New Hampshire. Just want to let people know that. And as I say, the other gentleman, Representative Lang, putting that bill forward, that's a huge step forward. It's sometimes putting a sports betting or putting any type of gambling bill forward is not the most popular thing to do. So it takes a lot of courage, understanding to do the right thing. And Jerry's done a great job over the years. 23 years, you said it was.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that says a lot about him. And Mark, I've worked with, he's about to become on the board of Mass Council on Problem Gambling. So he's on both aspects. He appreciates the right for people to wager, but to wager responsibly and for a safety net to be there if there is an issue. We're going to finish right on time, I believe. 1 minute. Is that okay, Dan? Dan, thank you for inviting us all. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oops, sorry.
We're gonna take a 5-minute break. There are bathrooms over there. Also, for the students, we have a number of students who are in here at 5 o'clock. Some of them have classes, so if you see a bunch of people leave close to 5, they're not upset or anything. They just have to go.
Good.
That in mind.
Yeah,
And
good,
also
because I
wanna
think we might have
thank
some dinner.
Spectrum Gaming Group, Sports Lawyers Association, Ice America, co-sponsoring.
Well, we're just offsetting each other's own. It doesn't
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a single person. Oh, sorry.
I'm only one. I'm always the guy. Sorry. Why don't we get to the next panel?
It's great to see the excellent turnout, but I want to make sure we get to our next panel, which is going to be great. Justin, how you doing? Justin Stempeck from the Massachusetts Gaming Commission will be moderating our panel on the state of play for Massachusetts, and we know what that's about. So Justin, I'll turn it right over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Michael introduced me, my name is Justin Stempeck. I'm an Associate General Counsel with the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. We have a great panel here today to discuss the state of play in Massachusetts. On our panel today, we have Executive Director Michael Sweeney from the Massachusetts State Lottery. We have Senator Brendan Crichton. We have Representative Dan Cullinane and Commissioner Gail Cameron from the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. So hopefully we'll get a wide view of what's going on with sports betting in Massachusetts. So without further ado, I'll set it off. And just for the panelists here, I have a couple questions. They're obviously targeted more at the legislators on the panel than others. For the rest of the questions, if you have an opinion or want to talk about it, feel free to jump in. I'm not going to target too many questions directly at too many of you. So feel free to think of it more as a conversation starter rather than a question answer with me. That being said, I'll go against what I just said and ask two questions to the two legislators on the panel. Senator Crichton and Representative Cullinane, you both introduced legislation recently to legislate sports betting in Massachusetts. What led you to that decision, and why is now the right time for Massachusetts to get into sports betting? Why don't we start with?
I'll defer to the
I was going to defer
to the Senate.
We work very well together in Massachusetts. So I'd taken up the issue of daily fantasy sports last session, and right as we were kind of debating that, whether or not it should go under the Gaming Commission and how it should be regulated, the decision came down and really seemed like a good opportunity. Obviously, Massachusetts is no stranger to gambling. We've had horse racing forever. The lottery has obviously been very successful. Casinos recently and daily fantasy sports. So it seemed like it'd be a great opportunity to pull folks out of the shadows, get some additional revenue, and provide the safeguards that we want to have for our consumers.
Right. Representative Cullinane?
Sure. I mean, I would just say quite candidly, regulating it is better than ignoring it and hoping that people forget that it exists. I think there was a quote in State House News where Jamie Chisholm from DraftKings was like, it's here. It's just not legal. And so when we have that conversation, it comes down to revenue, and there's opportunities with revenue there. to kind of bring this out of the shadows, to have that conversation, to allow people to be better protected, to regulate what's already there. You know, and at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. It's all better than ignoring it.
Can I just add one more thing, Justin? So I think also just in Massachusetts, I mean, we're 50% partner with our casinos. So we certainly want to make sure that they have the most attractive product possible. And, you know, in our legislation, we provide brick and mortar the opportunity to pursue sports betting. So we want them to be successful. The revenue we're expecting to come from them certainly depends on it.
And I'll note that there have been a number of other bills that have also been introduced by other legislators, both in the Senate and in the House. So just looking at the specific legislation that the two of you have introduced, what do you think sets your particular legislation apart from the other legislation that's kind of in the mix? And I think as recently, most of it's been pulled into a subcommittee. But why don't you just talk about your particular legislation? Let us know what sets it apart from the crowd, I guess.
So, I mean, a few bills are pretty similar. The governor's filed a piece. I guess the real big difference between my bill and his would be that he excludes all college sports. We felt like there's such a strong market with college sports that we really wouldn't be able to pull folks out of the black market and get them to participate if we completely eliminated that. That being said, we did, prohibit betting on colleges within our state, like some other states have done. I think the biggest question that we had going into this was the online component. I think, you see from state to state that that's been answered. It's really going to be the future of sports betting, and we feel like if we're going to be competitive, that needs to be a part of it.
Representative?
Sure. And as we get our arms around this, I just want to say it's great that we're taking our time with this. I think it's, once this ruling happened, it became a race. And that race can be a sprint or it can be a race to get it right. One's very quick, one takes a little bit more of a process. And so I want to give credit to our chair of economic development, Ann Margaret Ferrante, our new chair of Ways and Means, Aaron Mikowitz, and Speaker DeLeo, for really being very deliberate about the 11 bills that exist in economic development right now. I couldn't agree more with what Brendan said about, just look at the March Madness numbers alone, what people are expected to bet. And if you do not allow for collegiate betting, then at the end of the day, folks are going to stay on those illegal platforms. And so I think from what differs from my bill from the other or so bills that have been introduced is that mine gets into the official league data, which separates it because, I think in order to bring this all out of the shadows and out of the black market, you need to be attracting users. And with the official league data, in my opinion, you get the speed, reliability, accuracy, ownership, and ultimate accountability, because at the end of the day, it is the product that these leagues put forward that is being bet on. And so I think they hold the bag at the end of the day anyway, to either rightfully or wrongfully be blamed. And so I believe that they should be at the center of it in order to keep investing in the integrity of that data. Because once we get past the newness of this all, it's going to be about the integrity of the data and what separates it from working versus third-party vendors that may not be accurate, that might have that lag time, that can create those errors.
Justin, if I can just jump
Go ahead.
in.
Yeah.
So I'm Gail Cameron and with the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, but I did spend, I'm really happy to hear this conversation about integrity. I spent many years in New Jersey. Although I'm from Massachusetts, I spent many years in New Jersey with the New Jersey State Police. Many years early in my career working organized crime cases. I feel like I have to make a disclosure at this point because Director asked to raise your hand if you've ever bet on sports betting. I bet my hand went right up. I said, everybody's looking at me like, wow, it's not legal. But I worked a number of undercover jobs in New Jersey around organized crime, around sports betting, one in particular where it was a very violent group with loan sharking and the methods. So it rose to the level where we made a major case out of this with sports betting and loan sharking. And me as the undercover, right, in the 80s, early 90s, it really was a situation where they just didn't think of a woman in that capacity. So I think I had some success. And my technique, though, I had about an hour drive to get to this particular bar, and I went in about 3 or 4 times a week. And Mike and the Mad Dog, are we familiar with, I listened on the way up New York radio, and they would go on Fridays. They'd always give their picks and their, who's going to win games. So I actually, right, the anomaly, a woman betting all the time on sports betting in this bar. And, I did pretty well because I was listening to their picks. Of course, all the money went right to the state police. But I raised my hand and I said, God, people are probably looking at me like, why did I bet on sports betting? But I did. And so I'm really interested in the integrity piece because of what I've seen in my career. And I'm happy to hear both of our legislators here talk about the main reason is, bring it out of the shadows. I'm not going to opine on whether or not I think it should be legal because that's up to the legislature. But certainly the integrity piece is important to me. And it's nice that it's being highlighted here today.
And on the piece, just jumping back to what the representative said about official league data, obviously this has been a point of discussion and contention in some states, and you see Nevada pushing back pretty strongly, saying, "Hey, we never had it mandated here. Why should it be mandated now?" So I guess looking at it holistically, are there any detriments to requiring the use of league data? I know there's a lot of positives, which we can talk about, but are there any detriments? Does it create a monopoly, for example, for whoever MLB decides to give the data to? Are there any concerns, I guess, about mandating the use of official league data?
Sure. I mean, I'll just say that the answer to that is obvious. There have been cases that have been brought up, but I think that goes to kind of down the road, again, past the newness wearing off of this, is that, the question of that data is going to be fundamental. And I think in order to really focus on, again, getting this right and having the data be official, no matter what happens at the end of the day, no matter what third party, it's always the official league data that's going to go back to. Now, the third party vendors might have to end up cleaning it up and owning the mistakes. But at the end of the day, the official data is always going to be turned to. And I think it's very easy oftentimes in this conversation to say that all of these leagues, they're multi-billionaires, we don't need to give them more money and we can just do it without it. And it kind of ends there because it's tough to get a sympathetic ear. But I think from where I'm standing point, there is a fundamental concept of ownership. It is their product. It is being bet on. And if it's going to be turned to at the end of the day, then what we really need to look at is making sure that they, as a league, don't dial it back, but really ratchet it up and continue to invest in making sure that the integrity of their data, which is official, rightly or wrongly, is the 100% accurate. Because as you read continual stories about third-party data and offshore data and what happens when the lag time is too long and things like that result in big-time mistakes, I think as we begin the process, we really need to look 10 steps ahead. And I would rather get this right on the front end by turning to the official data than to not and let it be tied up in the courts way down the road.
Now at this point, we've seen sports betting legalized in, I think, 8 different states. And you've heard just in the earlier panel about Rhode Island's efforts as well as New Hampshire's efforts. So what can Massachusetts do that can build upon what we've seen other states do to make, if and when sports betting becomes legal in Massachusetts, what can we do to take lessons learned from other states and improve upon them in Massachusetts? And I'll put this out to everybody.
I'll just jump in really quick. I think both the representative and senator hit upon key points, which is I think Massachusetts made a great decision to take a deep breath and sort of analyze what was going on in other states and what type of bills were being enacted, and also what the actual on-the-ground impact was as they began to accept that betting. But I also just wanted to point out really quick, I also think Massachusetts is in a very unique position in comparison to some of those other states because we're a state that does not have sports betting as of yet. And we also do not have, not legally, and we also do not have legally online betting for lotteries. And to me, it's an opportunity to perhaps to examine both issues, to get the right language, integrity, transparency, and responsible gambling aspects right across a very significant platform in work and cooperation with the Gaming Commission, the lottery, and the state legislature to really perhaps iron out the wrinkles better than any other state has to date in the country.
No, go ahead.
No, you're next.
I just want to say I agree with Michael, and certainly we considered taking a closer look at having the lottery be a part of our bill, but we think pursuing the track to providing iLottery as well as cashless lottery, give them those assets and really help them grow that way. Obviously, we depend greatly on the revenue that comes from the lottery. We don't want sports betting at all to make a dent into that. So I certainly think you'll see some energy from the legislature to pursue both of these at the same time.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, again, up to the legislature as to who operates, but certainly regulates rather. But we have been doing our homework. We have been preparing in case it comes to the Gaming Commission. We want to be, so lots of lessons learned from other jurisdictions. We have been dialoguing with New Jersey folks, with Nevada folks, really trying to understand what's happening. And a lot of the things I'm hearing are very interesting. Again, I'm a little bit focused on the integrity piece because that's really important to me. But responsible gaming, of course, and we share this. Michael and I have done things together for responsible gaming, and we talk about having the best interest of the Commonwealth and not competing, but what's best for the Commonwealth. But lots of things that we've been learning. Certainly regulating this is very similar to what we do now. Strong investigations, strong licensing process, making sure operators, we regulate now in a manner that I think is pretty robust. And I think that's a good thing. Anything we do here in the Commonwealth, I think, the public wants to know that it's clean. The public wants to know what, I think people would prefer to do this legally rather than illegally. I really believe that. I hear people talking about driving to Rhode Island to bet because they'd really rather do it legally. So all of those things I think are important, the way we make sure we have clean people. The other thing I like about what we do here is we have very strong because again, I had this experience in New Jersey, very strong relationship with state, local, and federal partners as far as sharing information, critical with sports betting. Some of the monitoring systems, SWIMA, which is New Jersey has mandated that you use a monitoring system, which I think is really interesting. And it is really a fusion center, a law enforcement type fusion center where the data is shared and an analysis is made, whether or not there's an anomaly and is it suspicious? Is it, what level is it, do we just want to more than one alert? So sharing that data, I think, is huge to the integrity piece. And what they're doing, I think, it's something for all of us to learn from and decide whether or not that's appropriate to use a monitoring system like that. And I think that's a shared responsibility, right? The leagues have a responsibility. They have integrity programs. The regulators certainly have responsibilities, as do the operators. And I think with that shared responsibility, there really is a way to keep this, keep it clean and regulated the right way.
And I would just add, kind of in closing, I think the most comforting part of all of this is, Brendan's offered a bill, I've offered a bill, 9 other folks have offered bills on this. And as you go through and read all of these bills, there are way more similarities than differences. There's always going to be a difference on what the initial sign-up fee is or what the annual renewal fee is going to be. But when you got into protection of vulnerable populations, when you got into having conversations around problem gaming and wanting to be out front on that. And when you see all of those things, the protections and integrity pieces in place across all of the bills, I think then we're starting from a very healthy standpoint, because that enables those in the room in economic development and ways and means that are having these conversations with the governor, not only in our state, but throughout the country. Because I think as we look towards the future, there is going to be a federal bill put forward on legalizing federal sports gaming nationally. And so I think with all of the states doing different things, I think there's an inherent ability to cooperate. And I think that's what really pushes this forward, as opposed to kind of minor technical differences.
And just sort of dovetailing off that statement, obviously the online discussion is perhaps the most robust discussion surrounding sports betting now. You see the numbers out of New Jersey, you see Rhode Island going for the push for online now, New Hampshire just doing it. What are those main points circling around in Massachusetts with respect to the discussion of online sports betting? What are the concerns? What are the benefits? How is Massachusetts viewing that from a legislative perspective? And then I guess more holistically, what do you see as the net benefits and the net detriments to an online operation of sports betting?
I think a lot of people may not know this, but we already have online betting through our, horse racing in Massachusetts. So it's not as popular as, sports across the board, but it's a system that's in place. And what we've seen from Daily Fantasy or from other sports betting online and mobile platforms across the country that are starting to pop up now is the ability to track that data, to identify irregularities in betting, and to actually, increase consumer protection. I think there will be a counter argument to that, saying that it's going to, promote problem gaming in that, everyone, at least from our generation, is, looking at their phone nonstop. And with that mobile device, are you going to enable folks more? But I think you'll be able to identify those problems. And again, we're not going to pull anybody, we're not going to pull the amount of people we need to out of the black market to make it successful without online.
Well, I certainly agree with that. And from what we're studying, we're really engaged in the responsible gaming piece with the Gaming Commission. And we have a director of responsible gaming, and he has been researching all of these things. And we've talked about the fact that you really can track information. If somebody's betting more frequently, all of a sudden betting many more dollars than they were, is that a red flag? And there are ways to identify that and address it. So I think your point is very well taken, that is easier to track than someone that goes to a casino. So that is one aspect that is easier when it comes to responsible gaming.
I agree. I think the technology does have the ability to protect more than it has, than some of the kind of the arguments that spur fear. I think it really can protect individuals and can be used for good. And then the question of online gaming, and I can only speak for my bill, but it's the question of tying it to specific casino locations while allowing mobile, while allowing online. Should they be affiliated with a particular brick and mortar? And that's my bill says yes, because I believe we're spending a lot of time and energy and revenue to try to build up these destination resort casinos. And I think that if you can tie them while allowing online to exist, but still having that relationship, I think is incredibly important. And that can be with existing entities, and it doesn't have to be exclusive. They can work with more than one. But I think just having a tie-in to the casinos that one is, I believe, just opened, and the next one's on the cusp of opening. And so I think that's an important relationship to establish. And granted, that's all going to get flushed out, but I think that's an important piece of the conversation to your question.
Similar to the New Jersey model, where it is bricks and mortars, racetracks, casinos, and they allow up to 4 sports books per facility.
New Hampshire's lottery director, Charlie McIntyre, had a great comment during the last panel that retail behavior does not know geography. And in the past, what people were looking for, say from 1970 through 1990, 2000, was convenience. And technology has completely changed the definition, in my opinion, of what convenience means now. Convenience used to mean that you had the ability to leave your house, get in your car, maybe drive 5 to 10 miles to a physical location. And the convenience was that that location was open 24/7, 7 days a week. And an entire new business model developed around that convenience, whether it was literally a store 24 or a CVS that would be open with their pharmacy at certain locations 24/7. But you had to go, the customer had to physically go somewhere. Today, I would tell you that convenience means technology. The customer wants to be able to access what they want to be able to access 24/7 from whatever location it is that they choose to engage that product. And I think the experience of New Jersey and other states have shown the power of being able to place a bet through a mobile application. And I don't think that any state is going to be able to truly address illegal sports gambling without that mobile piece in it. And I certainly agree with all my colleagues. Anyone who has a concern about irresponsible betting behavior, then you want as much technology involved, because the data analytics you get about individual and group behaviors, as well as the ability of a governmental actor to be able to control that behavior, increases exponentially with the technology elements and the mobile elements, as opposed to just a retail setting. And I think that applies across the board to whatever the gambling pathway is, whether it's casino gaming, sports betting, lottery products, or horse racing product.
Yeah, and probably for most of the audience here, you don't need to be reminded of this, but the legal market is extremely sophisticated. So obviously we have to be cognizant when we're having these discussions about the fact that any legal product or legalization of this product has to be aware that people are betting online illegally now, and they're not going into the back shop of a smoky bar to write on a slip of paper anymore. That's not how it goes. So it's a much more sophisticated environment. So a legal product has to compete with that and be at least as sophisticated, you would think. So I think that's suggested by both of the two representatives here, the bills. Representative, you mentioned that you're tying of the New Jersey model, tying of the online operation to the brick and mortar. Now, Senator Crichton, does your bill do the same thing, or do you take a different tact on that?
No, we opted not to tether, and I'm not here to debate whether that's the best approach or not. We'll certainly let the committee process play out. But we just felt like, in Massachusetts, we're home to DraftKings, we're home to Technology Hub, really to give the most freedom possible to the online and mobile applications, also recognizing that they have the bandwidth and the ability to really do this on their own. We certainly want to see the success of our casinos. Like I mentioned earlier, we're a partner with them. But to that same end, we feel like this industry could grow here, and there's no need to tether at this point. But certainly look forward to the continued debate. I should also mention, I keep talking about brick and mortar, but we did include also the existing licensees for racing as well in the state.
Right, and that's been an interesting discussion. Where in New Jersey, we first saw it. Obviously, they're sort of first out there with the racetracks getting sports betting. So Massachusetts has active standardbred and currently thoroughbred racing, as well as some other interested parties, and potentially opening up expanded thoroughbred racing in the future. And that's going to be an active part of the discussion with respect to whether the horse racing industry gets involved in sports betting. So I know that's part of Senator Crichton's bill. Was that a consideration at all with you, Representative?
It was. Everything's kind of on the table. I think as we look at what's in each individual bill, there's an acknowledgement that as we take our time and with so many different bills offered, that kind of each individual bill had a piece that they wanted to discuss in the whole conversation. And so while mine was more on the piece on the data, versus the horse racing or other things. I think it speaks to what the chair of economic development and ways and means, the speaker and Senate president are dealing with, because as we kind of applaud the decision to kind of take a deep breath and figure this out, they're watching what's happening with other states, right? And we don't have a finite amount of data right now on which to base the decision. It's as our internal process plays out, we're seeing different revenue projections from other states. We're seeing different information on what was thought to be working, which may not be working, and what is actually working better. And so with all of those pieces, I think it's a very fluid conversation right now, as everyone's kind of doing their due diligence on the process. And I think that's a real testament to kind of what they're doing in their decision to really try to focus on getting it right.
I think Massachusetts also has the added benefit of having experience in the betting world setting previously. Like, I think the Massachusetts state legislature, whether you're talking about the Senate president or the House Speaker and a lot of your members, I would argue they really did get casinos and that world of gambling 100% right. The legislation that they passed, I think, was some of the most foresightful legislation that was passed in the country, creating a gaming commission, doing such innovative things as establishing a public health trust fund to specifically address the issues of problem gambling and other things that can happen around a casino environment, and also making provisions within that bill, within that legislation, to protect the existing Massachusetts state lottery at that time. And so I really feel Massachusetts, because of the legislative leadership, it really is acting from a position of strength in this particular world that a lot of states did not have that type of benefit because they didn't have exposure other than lotteries into the gaming world. I think that's going to serve us well in the long term.
And if I may, I just want to also really give credit to Speaker DeLeo at that time. As this was all being flushed out, the legislature just didn't kind of cross its fingers and hope we got it right. He put forward and made sure that he brought in industry experts like Spectrum to do a top to bottom analysis over the proposed legislation to make sure, not just from a legislative intent perspective that we got it right, but that actually from an industry point that we were making sure that we were hitting our stride the right way. And so I think he deserves tremendous credit for that, and we have no doubt that due diligence is going to continue with this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would concur. You know, really being involved with this industry now, and, you know, from being in New Jersey for many years and now back home in Massachusetts, really is strong legislation. And, you know, when it comes to responsible gaming, the monies to do that well, the research involved, and the monies that go to, say, the Attorney General's office and our office with to fight the illegal market. I mean, there's some significant cases that have been made in the last couple of years around illegal gaming in the Commonwealth. And frankly, law enforcement does not, for the most part, have the resources to handle those issues, as well as making cases. That really helps. That really helps. So the idea, you know, your office, all of our offices have been involved because we share information. You know, lottery brings information and that says, hey, there are illegal slot machines in these locations. So that is something that's noteworthy, and other states, other parts of the country really do take note of what we're able to do here, because the legislation called for all of these things to happen and gave the resources to do it.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that last point, because I hope that as Massachusetts engages this dialogue, that the requirements that Commissioner Cameron just mentioned are mirrored in new gaming bills. And so having the funding for responsible gambling and gaming and helping people out that are in a bad situation, but also that law enforcement aspect is really critical. So whether we're talking about daily fantasy sports or sports betting in general, placing those same type of criterias to make forced contributions, if you will, into a pool that can be utilized by the Gaming Commission, the lottery, the AG's office, state police, really makes a huge difference. And not to get sidetracked just quick, but just to show you the level of cooperation, the Attorney General's office, the state police, the Office of State Treasurer Goldberg, and the lottery, teaming up with the Gaming Commission, really helped to bust what was one of the more significant illegal slot gaming operations in New England. And in doing that investigation, it actually led to the solving of a cold murder case out of Pennsylvania that was over a decade old, where a police chief in Pennsylvania had been killed, and the individual involved in that essentially had been out on the run for an extensive period of time, even after being on the FBI most wanted list. Through this joint investigation, we were able to determine that the individual had deceased. And, you know, that was a great deal of comfort both to law enforcement, but also to the family of that state police officer, state chief in Pennsylvania. And things like that don't happen, and only happen when a state legislature has the foresight that Massachusetts had to fund these type of cooperative efforts that at the end of the day really can make a meaningful impact.
And this murderer, it's his family that was running the illegal gambling operation, multiple towns, a couple of hundred illegal slot machines, and the body was buried in the yard of the family. Right. So that was it's good to solve that case.
Absolutely.
Now, each of you, I think, has touched in some way, shape, or form on the one of the biggest issues in the sports betting conversation was integrity. So to the two lawmakers in the room, how do your bills address integrity specifically? And then I guess to the commissioner, what have you learned from other jurisdictions as far as best practices when it comes to integrity? I know you've touched on a few of those, but let's see if we can put a big bow on this. What are some best practices for integrity?
So, I mean, we leaned a lot on Chapter 23K, the gaming legislation, just recognizing again that I think the best place for this to be regulated is under the Gaming Commission. Certainly, you know, all the integrity pieces that were mentioned earlier will be a part of our legislation. I think also just to talk about how robust our public health trust fund is. It's one of the largest funds in the nation, and certainly that's going to be important as we continue this debate moving forward to make sure that the resources are there, both for the problem gaming end, but also that we have the due diligence of the commission to enforce those integrity pieces.
Not to belabor the point, it's just, as you read all of these bills, these were the strongest and most similar sections throughout. I think each bill puts forward a state law enforcement agency that's going to be monitoring this. Each of the bills talks about using technology to protect vulnerable populations, whether that's folks that can be preyed upon to bet more, or folks that are betting and betting in amounts that they shouldn't. Technology can really be our friend in policing this. And I think that's where, from the governor's bill all the way through each of the bills proposed through the legislature, that's where we saw the strongest language to really protect vulnerable people and to make sure that we use technology to do so.
Yeah, and I would concur. And again, I mentioned briefly earlier this, SWIMA, which is a sports wagering monitoring integrity association, and it is really getting MOUs with all the operators. Now, other states use it. New Jersey mandates that it be used. So all the operators have to sign on that they will report immediately and there's a whole platform in which to do this, right? Any unusual betting patterns or an individual, whatever it may be. And so that's, kind of an alert that goes in, and then they will monitor, this group will monitor, and does it rise to the level of a suspicion? And then all the regulators are notified. Regulators will have, with all of the bills, the staff to follow up with an investigation. It also gives the ability, that the technology is amazing. If there is something happening with an athlete, with an official, that is much more readily detected in an investigation to make sure this is clean. The leagues have to be a partner, obviously. Regulators and operators need to be active partners in sharing this information. And then, of course, law enforcement agencies having the resources to follow up and conduct these investigations to make sure it is clean. The integrity is really an important piece.
The great thing I think you're hearing today, and I think has been demonstrated in the past, is you're not hearing about turf wars in the Commonwealth, right? So whether it's from the governor's office or Treasurer Goldberg's office or the Attorney General's office, our state elected leaders, the Gaming Commission, the lottery, this is an issue that we're all on the same page on. We don't have artificial walls built up between us. There's cooperation, there's communication. And again, our state elected officials have been on the forefront of that, and they're responsive to it. And I think that's what helps to really create the type of winning cooperation that we've seen over the last couple of years in some of the cases that have been able to come forth out of Massachusetts on these issues. And so I think any type of breach of integrity or potential of outside actors trying to engage in any type of illegality as the gaming world in Massachusetts potentially is expanded, they're going to have a significant wall to try to breach.
Right. So obviously, there's been discussion about how the leagues have to be involved in any legalization efforts for sports betting, but there has been some friction in that discussion as far as what was raised in the earlier discussion about royalty fees or the integrity fee, as well as the recent request by the leagues that some of the sports betting legal jurisdictions not take bets on spring training. So is there an approach that Massachusetts is leaning to when it comes to how much power to give the leagues with respect to what they can control when it comes to sports betting in Massachusetts? Any thoughts on that discussion? To any of the, I guess, either lawmakers here?
Sure. I mean, I would say it's an evolving process, and I can only speak to my bill. And my bill, what it allows for is a royalty of 1/4 or 1% of the amounts wagered per calendar quarter from the commission to the sports wagering operator. Because I again go back to whether it's today, tomorrow, or in the future, the sports leagues are where the rubber meets the road. It's their product. That's where the ultimate accountability lies. And I think as the objective with sports betting is really to be better than the black market. And so how can we be better than the black market aside just from the technology? It's that speed, reliability, and accuracy, and that continued investment by the leagues into the latest and greatest technology to make sure that things are getting out almost instantaneous in real time, to make sure that the consumer, because of that, is having the best, most accurate, most reliable experience. And I think by doing that and by allowing them to put this money back into their own process, which is going to be turned to anyway, it really does allow for that investment to make the overall experience for the consumer to be the best that it can be. And that's where I think, maybe not today or tomorrow, but in the future, that's what really is going to be needed, is that integrity of the data in real time, so that it doesn't become just a cheap alternative to use third-party data. And, when mistakes get made, there's always that question of who owns it and what the reliable statistics are. And it's always going to come back to league data. So we need them as part of it.
So we kept royalty or integrity fees out of our legislation. It's something I would like to see play out through the committee process. I am the vice chair of the Economic Development Committee. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves without having a more robust debate. I would just caution that with the margins being so small in sports betting, that, with our tax rate, we set ours at 12.5%, which we believe is reasonable. But as you add on additional, money set aside, it starts to become, the likelihood of being successful decreases. So we have to be cautious of that.
So obviously, just touched on taxes, Senator. Representative, did you address a particular tax rate in your bill, or is that still up?
No, that was part kind of more open as we look ahead to the future of the debate through the committee process. And I think, again, as we, not to be too repetitive, but as we kind of take into consideration what's working or what's not working to make it the best possible with other states, I think that is really best left kind of for that final bill that comes out of economic development, which is going to be a combination of everything. And especially as we short-term, discuss budget implications, the governor anticipated 35 million as revenue for this year if we were to go forward and legalize it. But I guess all of those budget conversations are going to be sensitive to what's happening and what's working elsewhere.
So we with our 12.5% based off of some work that the Gaming Commission did, as well as an Oxford study. We estimate between $50 and $60 million based on our more open method of pursuing that. So I think the governor's estimate, I assume that the difference there is largely the NCAA being left out of it, but we'll have to dive into those numbers.
Well, the studies are interesting, though. The Oxford study you mentioned really does talk about two things when it comes to a tax rate. It is a way to keep the illegal market out, because you have to be competitive with the illegal market, right? And I think people are wise that sport. They know when the odds are good or bad, and they will go elsewhere if the tax rate is too high. So kind of twofold when it comes to tax rate. So, but the legislators here are aware and paying attention. So
we'll figure it out.
Yes, they'll figure it out.
And for anybody curious, the Oxford study was an Oxford economics report that was put out by the AGA, partnered with them. I think it was 2 years ago. If you Google it, you can find it. They did a state-by-state analysis of projected revenues for legalized sports betting and a couple of different rollout methods, including Massachusetts. So it's one of the few sources out there for a state-by-state data breakdown of what a possible legalized sports betting regime would look like in Massachusetts, as well as any other state. It's based on population, some other economic metrics that are too sophisticated for me to understand.
And how did Massachusetts rank in that study?
We were, I think, compared to the UK as far as our fervent fandom in Massachusetts. So that was an easy parallel that the UK people were able to make, because we love sports in Massachusetts. So
I think too, though, that study and what both our elected officials just brought up is very important to keep in mind here. There's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of business opportunity around this issue. But we're not talking about within an individual state a new pathway that's going to bring in, for example, $1 billion of profit, right? So the margins are small. The initial uplift, while significant, is not as significant as some of the other revenue generators. But I also think one of the things that we haven't discussed a lot is the other potential benefits by channeling this money from an illegal stream into a legal stream. It's something we see at the lottery, right? Like, one of the things that we do is that before you can collect your winnings, we're checking to see in cooperation with the state government whether or not you owe owe back child support, for example, or if you owe back taxes. So, you win $10,000, you come through the system, and you've got $3,000 of child support that hasn't been paid. Through the lottery and through these other mechanisms, that money can now be swept right out of those winnings and sent back to the Commonwealth and back to the families that need that money. And I think that's an added benefit that sports betting also potentially adds if it's legalized, is you're also sweeping those other type of delinquent accounts that otherwise would never get addressed if the legal sports betting is the only channel through which people have to engage sports betting. Right. So it's something important to keep in mind.
Very good. And so just following up on that, Director Sweeney, so where do you see the lottery's role in this whole discussion of the legalization of sports betting, both online or possibly in a brick and mortar venue only?
Whatever the Senate and the House says it is. I think it's good for us to have a seat at the table, obviously, and I think Treasurer Goldberg has been vocal about that. Similar to the situation when the state legislature was considering casinos. I know the state legislatures and gaming commission are protective of the lottery. The lottery does bring in $1 billion approximately of profit to the Commonwealth and to 351 cities and towns. And so having that voice at the table, that Treasurer Goldberg again has mentioned, in order to have input to make sure that lottery revenues and lottery gaming systems and the integrity aspect is protected is important. Other than that, we work in partnership with both the state legislature and the Mass Gaming Commission and anyone else who has a role in the gaming industry in the Commonwealth. As I mentioned earlier, we don't view any of this as turf wars or as negative competition. It's an opportunity for all of us to up our game, to be competitive and to be cooperative across the board. It's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Right.
And I think that's the way we view the situation going forward.
Just to I
can
keep
say-
cutting you off. You
No,
said-
no. I can say we look at it the same way. And, I think we were all very interested at the beginning with our first casino opening. How would that affect the lottery in the region? And in fact, it has the lottery sales, because of a strategic agreement with the lottery and the casino. That means, placement. Where would they be selling them? They had, they signed an agreement that they would. The numbers have been great. The numbers have been great. There has not been a loss in revenue in the area because of the casino.
So I just wanted to build off what Mike was saying, just in terms of working together. I can't say enough about you, the treasurer, and your team for, again, coming to the table and knowing that our bill didn't really address a number of the issues you're concerned with, but we're going to work together on other things. And for look on the crowd, I see a few of the folks that we worked with here, but from the casino end, racetracks, the leagues, the teams, the gaming commission, certainly, really across the entire industry, everyone has come to the table, both before and after we filed our bill, even if we didn't see eye to eye on things. And the same can be said for both the House and the Senate, which gets along pretty well, but sometimes we have our differences. So it's exciting that we're all on the same page and we're going to get the best package possibly passed.
I think one thing that lottery is interested in exploring is, and again, I think the state legislature did a great job, as Commissioner Cameron has mentioned, there's a requirement for the physical casino locations to carry and make available lottery products to the customers that are coming within their physical location. And as we continue this discussion about other type of pathways for gambling, particularly sports betting, if the Commonwealth does go in that direction, and if it particularly offers an online or mobile aspect to the sports betting, I think it would be fair for the lottery, as well as fair to our casino partners, that those new providers have a similar requirement. How do you meet that requirement of a physical space, but a physical space in the online world, if you will, right? And so we would hope that if the Commonwealth moves in that direction, it looks at things like allowing for data analytics to be shared by those type of companies with the lottery, and also provide the lottery with potentially the ability to do push notifications through those mobile applications, or to access emails, or to perhaps have pop-ups or other advertisements when jackpots get to a certain level. That's the requirement that the state placed on casinos in a physical location. And again, I just think it would be fair if we're doing a mobile application to have similar requirements apply in the cyberspace world as we do in the physical world.
And if I could just jump in on the end there, I just want to second what Senator Crichton said, and he has been a tremendous resource throughout this entire process. I mean, him and his team have jumped both feet into this issue and looked at it from every angle. And you know, of all the bills that I looked at in terms of, I think yours was the only one that had a specific prohibition of any entity that was an illegal offshore betting entity from even participating in what would be the legal process. And so, you know, that level of detail and just, you know, the great friendship and cooperation that I think it's pretty exciting to see this issue move across the country. But as we look in Massachusetts, as the director and everyone has kind of echoed, is just kind of the partnership on the ability to get into the weeds together and really try to get it right. And he has certainly done that. And that's what I think is going to really make whatever the final bill comes to be, and when it happens through the committee process, I think it's going to be stronger because of the work that he's done.
Thanks. And on that note, I think we're at time. Do we have time for any questions, Mike, or should we just, okay, no time for questions. Thanks to all of our panelists for coming up here today.
Thank you.
Right? We can all talk.
Yeah.
5-minute break. Okay. It's great. Thank you for being so thoughtful in your bill.
Thank you so much. No, thanks for everybody. Yeah, no, we're hanging out. We're gonna reach out to you
How are you? Good, things are well. Good. I think Dave Falcone's coming by tomorrow, actually. Yeah, he wants to be there when they're trying to put the machine placement. And I just emailed Annie right before this thing started as I drove up here. So I think Dave might try to at least introduce a conversation Thursday, depending who the heck's there. We know.
Thank you so much for having us.
Great. No, I felt bad because it was just, we had no idea if we had session.
No, I took that risk willingly, and it was obviously a wise decision. I haven't heard that level of understanding from any lawmaker across the country. I speak at all these sports betting conferences, and you're really like up on it. And you must have thought a lot about the importance of it. You know, it's the other side, the other part of the debate. Casinos, trying to present one narrative.
Lucky to have you. And that's fine, man. You got to figure it out. It's just a question of how we're gonna, you know, get distracted at the beginning of 5 years down the road. It just comes to a halt. I know, of course.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Well,
thank you.
Protect the pricing on it is to mandate that determined, you know, by the gaming commission.
I'm just gonna, you know, yeah.
Yeah, he
was just great. Nice job.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, good, yeah, great job.
You guys hang around?
No, I stick around. I got about half. We apparently just ran out the box so we didn't get questions. It was a real.
I should tell my daughter that. Sure, want to see that later. How you doing?
That's yesterday. Good talk.
Mike, good job.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You're more than welcome. Please, we all have experienced this stuff. Yeah. Oh, it must have helped. Yeah.
Certainly really want to educate.
Yeah. Well, we all care about getting it right, to be honest. That was. Hi, how are you?
Pleasure to meet you, Jackie. I'm Daniel Waller. Sorry, I'm your assistant. Thanks for
introduce you to Michael McCann, who runs the. Hi, how are you? Jackie Crum from Encore, Boston Harbor. So the company is in. Hey, how are you?
Sorry to sneak in.
It's actually like a in there. It's unavoidable. Channel 4. I'll be visiting at some point in Boston. Next month, but I'll be back. I would love that. I would love that. I've seen properties in Las Vegas almost exclusively until I realized that they carry Sweet Wall. For some reason, there's like this property-wide ban on Sweet Wall, and that's like an essential.
I did not even know that.
And when I asked them why,
Yeah,
somebody said,
thank you.
Mr. Wynn does not like Sweet Wall. I can't believe I got that response.
Yes, you do like McCann. All right,
Thanks for coming to this. That he is intricately involved in making decisions like that.
Vanilla ice cream brands or whatever.
Wow.
Every single one of them.
That's amazing. All right, so I could bring Sweet Wall back to the wing.
Yes, we can do that. We can accommodate you.
All right, I'm excited about this. Thanks. You know, Kip Levin?
I do. No, that's
Kip.
okay. I
He's
think we're going to
president and CEO. Milton is the commissioner from the one published this morning. Reputation being
No,
all what I see is
Don't worry about it. Jackie, thanks for being
No, thank you for inviting me.
I'm going to start it now. So we keep the train running on time.
Hi, Jackie Cross.
World champion. Nice to meet you. Nothing but lies.
Thanks for.
Just keep repeating that.
Did you see where? Yeah, the actual first sports book. Yeah, just right a coincidence. Right after our conversation, I read about it. No, I didn't read the bill. I read the
So, oh, you're using it.
Yeah, I'm gonna use it. I mean, I'll do as many as I can.
Do whatever
We'll
you
see.
feel like doing. I just wanted to give you back of insurance costs.
No, it's actually very helpful.
The chairman of the lottery?
I always saw you. I didn't say how you doing. Nice to meet you, Deborah. Thank you for being part of it.
That is a total.
We have a great colleagues, right? You know.
Is it? No wonder why I love it so much.
She's the star. She's
I
the
was
star.
feeling dizzy, so I went out.
She's the star. Thank you. Thank you both. Nice to meet you.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh,
Hi, Jackie Cross.
hey, Jackie. How are you?
Were you on the phone call that we had?
So we're going to begin, and this panel is on regulatory models for sports wagering. I will be moderating the discussion. We will also have time for questions from the audience. The panel includes Kip Levin, the president and COO of FanDuel. Thank you, Kip, for coming all the way out here. Daniel Wallach from Wallach Legal. We talked about Daniel before. Jackie Crum, the executive vice president and general counsel of Encore Boston Harbor. And Milton Champion, the executive director of the Maine Gaming Control Board. So this discussion will be about what are the best models for regulating sports gambling and what a panel to have that discussion with. Kip, why don't I start with, I know you're drinking water, so I'll wait. Sorry.
That's right.
So a year prior to last year, FanDuel was focused on DFS, and now you are in a different marketplace. You're the leading online sports betting platform in New Jersey. How did that work? Obviously, the Supreme Court decision was the pathway there, but
that was helpful.
That was very helpful. Yeah. How does having both DFS and sports betting work together?
Well, we even go a bit broader than that. So the FanDuel business has evolved a lot in the last 12 months. I was actually prior to July of last year running the U.S. business for one of the big European sports betting operators called Paddy Power Betfair. Our business in the U.S. was largely horse racing, actually, which was discussed a bit in the last panel. So we run TVG, which is the biggest online horse racing business, as well as television network in the U.S. We run an online casino business as well in New Jersey called Betfair Casino. And then we basically took those businesses and merged it with the FanDuel business as we saw sports betting opening up. Our point of view was that the audience we were going after in the sports betting market knew the FanDuel and the DraftKings brands very, very well. And at the same time, FanDuel was looking for expertise around sports betting, which we had. So it was a great sort of marriage of two businesses that were in a lot of different verticals. And if you look at the way the mature operators work in Europe, they're in all of those categories between horse racing, which is much more popular in Europe and Australia, where we have other international businesses. Obviously sports betting, on all variety of sports, online casino gaming, which is legal in most of those jurisdictions as well. So it's a big step forward, big evolution. And look, the good news is the daily fantasy business is actually still growing, and it's growing 15-20% year on year in the rest of the country, and it's growing just as much in New Jersey as well, even though a lot of our marketing effort is around promoting the FanDuel Sportsbook.
Given that experience in New Jersey, what advice, if any, would you have for those from Massachusetts and New Hampshire as they're thinking about this topic?
Yeah, look, I think New Jersey, I was just having a conversation with somebody else about this. New Jersey spent several years getting ready for it, right? They had been 5 years into the online casino gaming business, which was a lot of learnings there. We'd gone through that journey with them too, and then in anticipation that the Supreme Court was going to rule the way they ruled, they had spent time in Europe with us, understanding how sports betting works. And I think there's a lot of debates around retail versus mobile versus how many operators versus tethering it to a casino or a racetrack, so on. I think that the critical things that they've nailed, right? If at the end of the day, the goal is to try to go after the illegal market, you have to have mobile, right? And you can't put more restrictions in place, and meaning you can't have people having to go sign up at a physical location to then activate a mobile, which is similar to what you have in Nevada, right? Because again, you're competing with an illegal market that you don't have to do that, right? It's very, very easy. And you already have friction in the process through being a regulated operator, right? You're going to have to do KYC, which means, somebody's going to have to enter their social security number, and we're going to have to, as an operator, verify that. That's friction that illegal sites don't have to do. You're going to have to be a registered sort of legal operator, merchant processor, which means credit cards work half of the time, right? Because a lot of the banks are still trying to figure out whether or not they want to do it. Illegal sites, it works like a normal e-commerce transactions, and credit cards work 99% of the time because they have all these tricks that they do to sort of trick the processor. So there's already friction in being a regulated online operator. To add more to it, you're just going to slow down the process of migrating people from offshore.
Thank you. Dan, in-game wagering. In-game wagering, it's been thought that approximately 40% of betting on mobile devices constitutes in-game wagering. What are some of the unique challenges with that versus other types of sports wagering?
Well, I think Kip could probably speak more firsthand towards that because it's in his market in New Jersey. And I know traditionally in Europe, the in-game market is probably 70 to 80%. It's a little bit less here, but it's growing. But it does kind of tie in nicely with his central point about how essential mobile betting is, because without mobile betting, the real-time ability to bet, nanosecond, you don't have an in-game wagering market. So you need to have mobile. But it also does underscore the need for reliable data because that's going to drive the entire in-game wagering market, and speed matters, reliability matters, accuracy matters, and a lag time creates opportunities for manipulation and could also, be susceptible to manipulation and potentially narrow the window for potential in-game wagering opportunities if the delay is too long. So when you're talking in-game, which is going to be a growing part of the landscape, mobile and the best data possible, which I view as official data, I think go hand in hand.
In-game for us is already over 50% of our total wager.
Is that going up?
And it's going up literally every week. I mean, it was probably 30% through the NFL season, and since then, I think we've been consistently over 50%, and that's even surprised us. I think we would have anticipated it to be lower. Well, people were still trying to figure it out. Again, I think it's just more proof that, all of the projections of what the size of the illegal market, the high end is probably right, because people knew what they were doing. Right? Like there was very clearly people had experience in doing things like in-game betting.
Jackie, the Encore Boston Casino is I believe set to open in June 2019.
Scheduled for June 23rd.
Okay. And the addition of a sports book will, of course, be a major economic boon to it. In New Jersey, I've seen reported figures show 80% of total legal sports wagering is attributable to remote betting. How is that going to play if that proves true in Massachusetts as well? If people are betting that way rather than physically at the facility, what kind of challenges does that place on Encore?
I don't think it poses any additional challenges on us as compared to any other operator. I think it's interesting. People come and they visit our facility right now, and most people believe that sports betting is actually legal right now. The first question we get asked is where the sports book is. So once we explain,
what's the answer?
Not yet. So we fully support online sports betting and anticipate that that's a major part of the business.
Other thoughts on that? Any other reactions?
Well, I mean, again, I would look back at New Jersey, right? Online casino gaming was legalized in 2013. Atlantic City has seen nothing but increased traffic into its casino since then. So Atlantic City was on a multi-year sort of economic decline. Online has actually created new customers who, once they start playing online, are now going into physical casinos when they otherwise wouldn't have. And I think if you ask any of the operators in New Jersey who are running retail, even though it is 80% online, they are all seeing increased foot traffic, obviously, coming into their buildings as a result of having sports books.
We also see in Nevada, a lot of people actually come into the physical structure and sit there and bet on their phone. So it's definitely, I think it's the more convenient tool, but they do like to actually be in a physical presence of the sports facility as well.
I mean, we actually see it both ways. We've had days, so we run the sports book at the Meadowlands in New Jersey. I've seen days where you have an hour-long line to get in and place a bet at a teller, and people are looking at their app. They're looking at all the odds on their app, but they want to actually use and place a bet with cash and have a physical ticket in their hand and so on. So the two play really well together.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of highlights, at least within New England, a little bit of a running debate. Rhode Island, I think, may have some legislation that would require the customer to physically go to a casino and sign up for an online platform, right? So you can bet on your mobile device, but in some of the jurisdictions, the casino industry doesn't want to totally lose the experience with the customer. And the belief is, make them come into the casino to open up the account, and we'll have that kind of stickiness with the customer. But if you're going to do mobile the right way, I think New Jersey has been a pace setter here. And the idea that one must sign up for a mobile account at a land-based venue doesn't make any sense to me. If you're going to eliminate or tamp down on the black market, I think you need to make the mobile experience as easy, convenient, and accessible as possible, not just from the moment you make a bet, but even from the very beginning when you're onboarded and signing up for an account.
And I think we've seen this work in the fantasy sports area. So we know that they can geofence appropriately. We also know that age verification is possible and has been done with great success. So we would support also the remote sign up.
Actually, this morning we had our second sports bill was published this morning. The first one was with language to be furnished at a later time. This one that came out this morning will kind of throw everybody for a loop a little bit on this current discussion, because in that bill, and I did look at it relatively quickly this morning before I left and before I had my coffee, so don't hold me to too much, but it's basically stating right now that there would be sports lounges in the 2 casinos in Maine, and that that a Native American tribe could get a license to have mobile. So that's that's what that bill's coming out, or that bill has been published and actually, has to go through the process and everything. But it's just strange how we're having this conversation here. And now I'm going to throw another mix into it where we have land base that will not have online betting, but a tribal can offer online betting.
Is that the only state that would have that arrangement that you know of?
That I've seen so far. Honestly, I moved up to Maine in 2016, and
From Florida, right?
Pardon?
From Florida?
Yeah, it's too hot down there. Yeah. I wanted the snow.
You like this weather?
I like shoveling, So, but when I first went up, they said, gee, you used to oversee 27 pari-mutuel facilities. They had 7 of them had slots. You initiated this first Seminole Compact and all that sort of thing. Aren't you going to be a little bit bored when you get up to Maine with just 2 casinos? Well, since then, I've now received nonprofit gaming, which, believe it or not, takes a lot of your time, or at least does mine. From the state police, they transferred it over to our office. I got surprised last year with fantasy sports, which I'm currently trying to finish up on the rule making. But as most of you know, a rulemaking process, and I had 3 RFPs last year, so we all know how much time that takes. So everything's kind of like pushed back a little bit. So it's kind of nice that Maine's kind of taken caution to this, and I heard that, I think, with Massachusetts as well. We're not in a rush to be out there and be one of the first in this case. In fact, in either case, we would like other states to mess up and have the hiccups and so forth, and so that'll mean less for us in the later time. So I honestly think that we're not really in a rush, and we're looking to hopefully be able to do it right out of the gate.
So Milton, your question really brings up the fact that in New Jersey and in Nevada, an operator's ability to offer mobile or online betting requires that there be a partnership with a land-based gaming venue. Massachusetts, we heard this in the last panel, those bills do not require that. At least some of them don't. What are some of the pros and cons of having this requirement that there has to be a tethering of a land-based entity and the capacity to place a bet online? I mean, is there a justification for it? Is there a policy rationale?
Well, I'll tell you what, in my view, and this is strictly my opinion, I started in the industry in Atlantic City in 1980 something. It's like that TV show you watch, 1980 something. Goldberg's, there you go. But anyway, I started in the industry on the gaming side, and I was part of opening 5 casinos. I worked in 8 different jurisdictions, with 8 different commissions and so forth. So when I decided to go to the other side of the hallway in 2006 was when I went to start working for governments and commissions and agencies and that sort of thing. I just, over the years, I've kind of seen things happen. Like when I left New Jersey in 1991, there was these things called riverboats, but they had to go out for 40 minutes and come in for 40 minutes. And then, well, the weather's really bad here, so they can stay dockside. And then all of a sudden a tornado comes through and sends 3 or 4 barges about 5 miles inland. Oh, well, now we can have land base. So I think everything's kind of like a trickle. The most recent thing that maybe not so much recent is the pari-mutuel industry. Okay. And I can definitely speak to that coming from Florida. The slot machines were put in to help the pari-mutuels. Okay. So now we're kind of like seeing where there was some discussion about brick and mortar. All right. So now are we taking away from the brick and mortar, the visits there, because we're now offering online? People don't have to leave their house now. They can just sit there and play and win and make their transactions and everything else. And so, and I know the thought pattern is, well, gee, let's get out. Let's go out tonight. Let's not sit on the couch and eat bonbons and make bets. Let's go and, have some other alternative or entertainment. So I think in that retrospect, where the casinos or the racinos were brought in to help the pari-mutuels, I think sports betting and online betting, in effect, is there to maybe help out the casinos themselves. So, hopefully there's not this drag out position, but for the time that I've been in the industry, that's kind of what I'm seeing.
I mean, look, we obviously have a lot of experience with this. I mean, through the TVG business for years and years, talking about the parimutuel business, we've had market access partners with various tracks in various states where they make a percentage of our revenue. Obviously our online casino business for the last 5 years, we've been working with the Golden Nugget Casino in New Jersey. That's a great partnership for us. We actually share best practice. Even though we're online competitors in the space, we share best practices. We work together on, talk about what works from a marketing perspective. How are you doing on sort of processing transactions and deposits, et cetera. So that's been beneficial. It just goes into the general tax discussion for us. If market access through a partnership with a casino, or a track or a tribe or a lottery, plus the tax, plus the federal tax becomes too much overall for us to where we can't commercially compete with the illegal market, then it gets problematic. But as long as those things all add up to, in effect, a reasonable tax rate for us to operate, then, we're generally fine. And we will hopefully find the right partners that will be beneficial and additive to the business that we're doing in that state.
Okay. Jack, you're down.
No, and I agree with Kip. I think the market is large enough to have a number of players in the market and bring in the competition that you want to see in order to create the right product. Obviously we've got a vested interest in, given the amount that we've spent on our infrastructure and job creation, but we know that there are companies like your company and other fantasy sports companies who are not represented here today, who have also made a substantial investment in the Commonwealth. From our perspective, our chief focus would be the compliance infrastructure that we have within the bricks and mortar facility. We obviously have the surveillance, we have the know your customer, not to say that other players could not do that, but from a regulatory perspective, we see that as advantageous to the regulators to have one place to go and be able to assess everyone's compliance from a responsible gaming perspective, and also,
Yeah. I think in that respect, Governor Baker's bill, and I believe Senator Crichton's bill, is transformational, as is the New Hampshire bill. It would be the first, those would be the first jurisdictions to untether online platforms from land-based casinos and really open up the market. I mean, I don't know how many vendors will be in New Hampshire, but in Massachusetts, having an open marketplace will spur competition, innovation, provide better choices for consumers, and I think we'll capture a larger overall percentage of the market if you give customers the maximum amount of choices, rather than say, okay, you have to find a partnership with one of the 3 casinos in Massachusetts. New York has some similarities. New York has 4 upstate casinos, and unlike New Jersey, New York, the bills that have been introduced in New York contemplate only 1 skin per casino, or only 1 online brand per casino. That doesn't provide the consumer with nearly the same number of options and choices as an open marketplace would, which I think would lead to an overall better product and would spur innovation, create competition, and really be to the betterment of the state and to consumers.
I've read that 97% of betting on sports in the United States is through some sort of unlawful means. And if that's true, obviously it's going to go down as states begin to permit betting on sports. But how do we deal with the public health considerations? If people become addicted to gambling, if people bet too much, and this was alluded to in one of the earlier questions, what mechanisms should be in place to address that topic?
Well, I think, first of all, the legalization of that, it gives you the data that you need in order to review what's actually going on. What's happening right now is, of course, you have people who nobody's capturing that information, and you're losing people in that process. Particularly with online sports wagering, tracking of that data makes it incredibly easy to identify patterns and problems. And we certainly have the mechanisms in place within the Commonwealth to provide assistance, to direct them to the appropriate facilities. There's a very fine line between reaching out to someone and saying, you've got a problem, and identifying them and leading them, and providing them with the right tools. And I think, particularly with online, it's incredibly easy to do, more so than it is probably in a bricks and mortar regular facility.
Yeah, it's interesting. Everybody associates online with an increased risk in responsible gambling, issues with that. And, you know, we've said that for years and years and years in the horse racing business, right? Like, you know, with online, you know, ADW, which has been around forever, it's exactly right, right? Like we've got, you know, all of our customer service agents are trained in responsible gaming. They go through mandatory annual training around best practices to listen to customers. You know, they can monitor behavior. So same thing, like we monitor how much people are depositing and spending. We monitor for sort of changes in behavioral patterns and so on. And, you know, we're doing that now in New Jersey and translating that in. And you can't do that in retail, right? Because we have 30 retail tills in the Meadowlands in New Jersey. Somebody could go up to a different teller every time. They'd have no idea how much that money that person's putting through.
Kip, as I understand it, right now there's self-reporting by operators. Is that enough for compliance issues? Should there be a governmental entity that's much more rigorous and that maybe requires records being shared? I know that in the state of live free or die, that kind of tenor isn't always popular, but it ought it to be.
Look, I think, you know, a regulated licensed operator has to be held to a standard, right? We certainly hold ourselves to a very serious standard, and you know, those standards are what need to be sort of upheld by the regulators in any jurisdiction. And so that means, right, like, you know, somebody online or retail, right, to the extent that we can track it in retail, but it's much, much harder. But so to simplify it, online, right, once somebody has, you know, lost or deposited over a certain amount of money, we will freeze that account and we'll do a mandatory, but we need another sort of proof of wealth check from that person before we'll let them continue on any further, right? And so there's a number of hurdles. Like we have, you know, I think we were actually the first online casino operator where we were putting ads on television in New Jersey that talked about all the responsible gambling mechanisms that worked within the app. So the ability to go in and when you sign up for an account, you can actually put limits on how much you can deposit into your account every month, right? So you can set that, you know, you can go in and you can do a 30-day freeze, you can do a 60-day freeze, you can do a 90-day freeze. So there's a lot of things that you can do using technology that sort of give people the guardrails that, you know, they might need. But at the end of it too, right, you also have to remember it's 1% of the population of people who are, you know, playing online gaming that have a problem. But again, we take that very seriously.
Milton, Jackie, or Dan, any
Okay, no, one thing that I could see states doing more of is earmarking the percentage of tax collections associated with sports betting revenues to help problem gamblers and compulsive gamblers. And I believe New Hampshire is actually a pace setter in that regard by creating, I guess, some kind of a fund. Is it 10% of the, you know, tax collections from sports betting? Very few, not that many other states mandate a percentage of tax revenues to go to help, you know, problem gamblers. So there are all sorts of programs that cost money that states can, you know, really assist through this, you know, mandate in the state law that, one, you don't see in the black market. There are no, you know, compulsive gambling safeguards when you're dealing with offshore sites. But some of the first mover states, I don't believe, have done nearly enough to ensure that proceeds, cash, money, be directed into programs as a mandate under the state law. And I like that New Hampshire is taking a leadership position in that regard with what I think is probably the highest benchmark so far, which is 10%.
We didn't pay you to say that either.
No.
I do think that the other thing that's critical is the operators have to have, there needs to be a uniform exclusion list, right? Like if somebody excludes and they're permanently excluded, it all has to go into one list. That person, they say, you know what, I have a problem. I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
You know, it shouldn't just be with us, right? It should put them on a list that then other operators have to make sure that that person can't come in and sign up for an account on another operator. That's critical.
And Massachusetts has done that very well in terms of the regular land-based casinos right now. As opposed to someplace like Nevada, for instance, where you can exclude from one hotel and walk in next door and keep going. I think in the answer to your question about availability of information too, everyone who's familiar with gaming recognizes that we have what's called privilege license. So the regulator has full jurisdiction and control over what information is required and provided. And that's why I think going back to getting out of the black market and having that regulatory authority makes all the difference.
Let's talk about integrity fees, or sports betting right and integrity fees, as the NBA has turned them. So the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the PGA Tour have been asking state lawmakers, including perhaps some in this room, to include a provision in legislation requiring that betting companies pay the leagues a royalty or rights fee, depending upon how you want to term it, of 0.25% on all wagers. Reactions?
Not in our bill.
Well, we believe, the leagues should maintain the integrity of the sporting event. The operators should maintain the integrity of the sports wager. So they're already required to make sure that the sporting event has the integrity.
I'll let Dan respond.
Yeah,
He clearly wants to jump in.
Somebody coined the term integrity fee, and it's obviously stuck over the past year. I think the premise of it is a royalty and a rights fee that is built upon 3 pillars. Pillar number 1, they create the product that is commercially exploited by others. Without sports, there's no sports betting. Number 2, the leagues, by virtue of this dramatic expansion of sports betting nationwide, will be incurring additional expense. There's no question about it. They'll have to ramp up, monitoring, investigative arms, education. They're going to be spending more out of pocket, and not just on lobbyists. Number 3, if you expand sports betting nationwide, even if you regulate it, you increase the risk factor associated with the integrity of the game. I know when you create a state-centric system of regulation, in an ideal world, if you're just migrating everything over from the black market into legal regulated markets, yeah, the leagues have a lower level of exposure, but I think a significant part of the new betting landscape consists of bettors who have not been betting in the black market. So I think as you proportionally increase the amount of betting, there's a concomitant increase. I don't know if I said the word correctly.
I'm not sure either.
There's an increase in the risk factor, although I think state level regulation provides a detection system. But at the front end, I think there's also incentivization and risk associated with more people an increase in the number of people who might try to corrupt the game, either by acquiring information or so forth. And then take those 3 factors and look at another segment of the gaming industry, which is horse racing. The pillar of horse race revenues.
Why hasn't Nevada ever required this?
That was 1949, and that's a fair point that the casino industry raises. It's been like that for 60, 65, 70 years. But to go from 1 state to 50 states potentially, I don't think that is a public policy justification for keeping the status quo. And I will add that under federal law in horse racing, we have something known statewide. We have race books. You can go into a casino that has a race book, and you can bet on horse racing taking place at out-of-state racetracks. Well, the host or the guest track, which is the race book, has to pay the host track a percentage of the handle. It's not specified in the law as a percentage of the handle, but it is a consent-based requirement where the guest track has to have the host track's permission to be able to allow wagering on the host track's race. And that is what I consider a similar system to what the leagues have been asking for as the creator of the content. And they are incurring an outsized risk relative to horse race operators who are getting the same thing under federal law. So I don't think the idea of a royalty for the creator of the content is so path breaking. It already exists in horse racing, and for some of the larger public horse racing companies like Churchill Downs, more than half of their publicly reported horse racing revenues are attributable to host fees that they get from the OTB sites.
You strengthen your argument on this one, since we always debate this when we're on panels together.
Well, you got me last time. I had to do a little research.
Yeah. So the one thing I'll push back, and this is the position that we take on this topic, right? Like we don't disagree that there should be some commercial relationship between the operators and the leagues / content providers and so on. We just don't believe that the rates should be written in a statute. And actually, in most states in horse racing, it isn't actually written into the state level statutes about what the rate should be. There are a few exceptions where it is that way, and we argue that it shouldn't be that way. It's a commercial negotiation. So in the horse racing business, right, we have an annual debate, slash negotiation with the host tracks everywhere about what the rate is going to be. And, over time, it's settled into what, we feel to be sort of reasonable rates, based on what we're willing to pay and what they're willing to receive. So we view the leagues getting something sort of in the same way. And actually we have relationships now with the NBA and the NHL where we're making payments to them through commercial things, and we're getting other commercial things in return, like the data, right, which we use for our in-play, like the access to be able to buy advertising on their official media sources and so on. So we're not necessarily against the concept of it. We just don't think that it should be dictated, or set on a rate, quarter point, whatever it is, in a statute.
Should betting? Oh, sorry, Jackie.
No, I was going to say we agree with that. We think there's just ample room to monetize that through commercial relationships rather than a regulatory, statutory.
I do want to speak to the commercial relationships issue for a second. FanDuel, DraftKings, Wynn, those are the kinds of companies that will enter into and have entered into commercial relationships with the leagues. I don't believe that they represent the risk here. The risk is that as we nationalize sports betting and have double digits numbers of operators on a state-by-state basis, what we're seeing in commercial agreements so far is just really the cream of the crop companies entering into commercial deals. MGM has deals with 3 out of the 4 leagues. FanDuel, the Stars Group, I would expect Wynn probably buys their official data from the leagues. If they don't, they probably will. And if you were to look more broadly across the spectrum and just do an operator by operator, checklist in all of the legal regulated states, I think the number of operators and licensed, gaming companies that offer sports betting that have deals in place with the leagues to buy data or to monetize it somehow is probably less than 30%. So it's a great concept. If every company were to enter into a commercial relationship with the leagues, we wouldn't be here having this discussion. But only very few have so far, and the vast majority have not.
Should betting companies be required to use leagues' official data?
I think there are other reputable companies. I mean, we've seen this happen in Europe. There are reputable companies who are producing this data in Europe.
So non-official.
I don't know why it needs to be a monopoly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, we would prefer, obviously, if the leagues were, we would like the leagues to have multiple official data providers so that at least there's, we can go negotiate with several and it isn't run like a monopoly, but it also depends on how you're going to run your business, right? And if you're going to be just a small niche operator and so on, like maybe you don't need to be an official partner, right? Like you're just going to be small and regional. I think the other way to look at it is in play, right? Like we run on any, given NBA game, for example, we run 250 different bet types per game, sort of like Super Bowl level prop bets on every game. And we run probably 100 different bet types in play. Right? Most operators don't come close to that volume. So for them, having official, live data might not be as commercially important to run their business.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not in the in-game wagering market, you don't need official data, but we're assuming that most of the operators will be offering in-game wagering to their patrons. And the choice is, do you want the fastest, most reliable official data source, or do you want courtsiders coming into arenas and scraping data and they buy them from, some third party? The latency or lag time of even a few seconds can be prone to manipulation, could also narrow the betting opportunity because the market will be closed during the time lag. So if it's just a matter of price, if the leagues were to give this away for free, there's no question every single operator would want it. So that does beg the question, how do you ensure that there's fairness and parity and equity in the pricing? And some of the legislation that I've seen that would be worth modeling would be the requirement in New York that it be set on commercially reasonable terms. And that judgment would be in the discretion of the state gaming commission. So there are mechanisms in place to ensure that the NFL isn't just simply saying to FanDuel, you can have our official data for $20 million. There are some statutory requirements, at least in some of the bills that are in the pipeline, that I think ensure that there would be some criteria by which the operator and the league would be able to find the right strike point on a price. And certainly leaving it up to the gaming commission as the final arbiter is the ultimate, resolution to ensure that the operators aren't being taken advantage of from a price perspective. So I think there is, in the best possible world, you want everyone using the most reliable and accurate data. and not having that kind of
There
discrepancy.
could be antitrust implications as well based on some of what I just heard. I mean, we'll find out. But I want to leave.
Just one other point on it. I think it's interesting that the official data feed and people saying things like it's ripe for manipulation and it's problematic and it leads to integrity challenges. At the end of the day, it's actually the betting operator who's taking on the risk and has the most to risk by not having a low latency, highly accurate feed. We have our sort of famous example where we had a glitch in our feed during an NFL game, and somebody placed a $100 bet that should have paid $20 in profit, and because we had a glitch in our feed, it paid $82,000.
You honored
it,
too.
we honored it out. So at the end of the day, we're financially incented to go out and cut commercial deals again if we want to run that type of betting.
Milton, I want to leave time for questions, so let's start with questions.
As more states roll out mobile, and as you say, if they allow them to be untethered, so then it's not Wild West, but there's a lot of players. You have to break through the clutter. How do we prevent the UK, Italy, issues where there are so many advertisements to break through the noise that it becomes a real regulatory issue? Is that up to you to do that, or is that going to be someone in the government legislating?
Look, I think we have those conversations ongoing. Again, I'm on the board of the AGA. There's a group within the AGA that's sort of looking at advertising best practices, sort of putting out sort of pillars of this is how you should be thinking about advertising. As we're talking to large media companies, we're talking to the leagues and the teams. We're being clear. Look, I get that everybody sort of has big dollar signs in their eyes, but we need to do this in a responsible way, right? And we can't. I wasn't in the daily fantasy business 5 years ago when it sort of came out of but we've already sort of learned that lesson once through sort of the early days of daily fantasy, and that didn't go very well. So I think we are absolutely aligned, from an operator standpoint, from I think, the league's perspective. The media companies are just trying to figure it out, and I think, certainly we would hope that they will be on board with moderating how much advertising they're taking, right? Because I agree, we do not want to see games flooded. We do not want to see in-game advertising. We have a deal with the New Jersey Devils where we're doing certain things during the game on the Jumbotron, but we're being cautious about what we're putting out there, knowing they're kids, they're teenagers at the games, and we want to make sure that we're doing this in the right way.
Yeah, and we get inquiries too. Not a lot, but it's like, can you go to the UK and get my jackpot for me? They won't pay me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to have any regulatory oversight or anything like that. In fact, I think if anything, that'd be more of a federal thing, but I don't want to say that too much. But you're exactly right. There's everybody's online all over the place, so it's going to be hard.
Yeah, that's a good question,
Justin.
So if leagues were to get an integrity fee or royalty fee or whatever else you want to call it, and this is in the highly regulated world of gaming where everybody is licensed and background checked and cross-referenced and everything else, wouldn't the leagues have to go through that same process, and would they?
Well, they're not. I can't speak to Massachusetts law, but when you see revenue shares in certain states require licensing, this isn't revenue. This is not tied to the gaming activity where they're taking wagers. They're not supplying equipment. They're not distributing, gaming related services. It's just, just off the top. I don't think that would necessitate a licensing situation. This is the first that I've heard of it. If they were sharing in revenues in certain states, maybe that would require some kind of licensing, but the percentage that they're seeking is based upon, the handle, not the hold.
It's a good question, because actually, if you think about, so taking New Jersey as an example, if you're a marketing affiliate, which means you have a marketing relationship with us where we pay you for a new customer sign up, and then we pay you a percentage of that customer's revenue on a go-forward basis, you have to get licensed as an affiliate, right? So what you're saying is true, that technically by regulation in New Jersey, if the league were to strike a commercial agreement with us where they were getting a percentage of of revenue or even handle, they would have to get licensed as an affiliate.
Yeah, and licensing is a function of either regulations issued by a gaming commission or state statutes. Statutes can say whatever they want, and if a particular state were to enshrine within a sports betting law a requirement that the leagues receive a quarter of a point, the legislation could say that this does not constitute a situation that would require licensure. So I think that would be addressed in a state statute. If it's silent, the assumption would mean that there's no requirement to be licensed. I know if you're in New Jersey and you're getting a revenue share as an affiliate, you got to get a casino service industry enterprise license. If you get it on a per head basis, not a revenue share, but based upon some other revenue model, just the cost per head, then you just register as a vendor. So it really does differ from state to state, and it's within the prerogative of the state to determine how and under what circumstances, fees like this get paid.
Then when you look at licensing and individuals, are you going to start fining the player for throwing a game? For the ball being not inflated enough?
Yeah, but I think that kind of conflates things.
I mean, when you talk about integrity, though, right? You're talking about integrity now.
But we're talking about a royalty.
But I would think that they in and of themselves, as they're going to present a game, do we not hold the casinos responsible for that, for those deck of cards being 52 cards in a deck? Okay, so what's the difference with, making sure it's like taking a knee? How much did the NFL lose with that?
But Milton, the gambling companies are offering a gambling type product. The leagues are providing a sport, and
they can remove some of the cards from the deck and not make it, integrity situation, or not make it a game.
I know, but certainly in your example, Justin, the leagues play absolutely no role in the gambling aspect of it. They're not supplying any equipment. They're not accepting wages. It's just passive receipt of a small percentage of the overall handle. And I don't think that places them close to the inner workings of a gambling operation that would kind of require the type of licensing to ensure stakeholder integrity. I think it's far enough removed from having a stake in the profits to disassociate the leagues from a licensing situation.
Yeah, I'm certainly not suggesting it. I'm just saying that when you use the word license, now you're into a whole different category, because we use license in the nonprofit side. We use license, we use registration. Okay, license, a lot more stringent of a procedure than just registering something. So when you get into that, you want to be kind of a little bit cautious, I would think. At least I would be.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Thank you. The question was for Kip, and if you covered this already, pardon me, but given your experience in New Jersey, and on the earlier panel, we heard about potentially an approach in Massachusetts would be online licensing only versus tethered, but what's your company's philosophy on the importance of bricks and mortar and online together? How's that worked out?
Yeah, I think we've obviously had great success with the Meadowlands and the business there. We view, our parent company in Europe, Paddy Power, runs 650 betting shops between Ireland and the UK. So we have retail in our DNA, and we think that the businesses, for us in New Jersey, have been very complementary. So even in a state where we potentially would be able to get an online license, I think we would still pursue potential partnerships where we could also be in the retail business, because again, it's, we think the two go very well sort of hand in hand. I mean, sports betting is very social, right? And it's, people want to be doing it with their friends and being in an environment. Sports bars are very cultural here, right? And so, you see the atmospheres that are created in Las Vegas, and we've, been lucky enough to create that at the Meadowlands. So I think as we go from state to state to state, we're excited about the potential for finding the right retail partners in jurisdictions, and looking forward to it. By the way, there was another thing discussed as I'm thinking about going to our retail location tomorrow for the kickoff of March Madness. I think it's also important this dovetails over to the NCAA point. The NCAA has been way bigger for us than we would have thought. We always knew that it was a large part of the handle in Nevada. We weren't necessarily sure that it would translate to be that big in New Jersey. I think it's between 30 and 40% of our total business so far. I mean, college football was almost as big as NFL. College basketball, even before the tournament started, has been bigger than the NBA for the last couple weeks.
I mean, as we talk about amateurism in sports, right? The idea that they're not, they're just students. That right there,
I mean, it's
reaffirms the point.
Well,
that they're
definitely been shocking for
And
us
if
to
you
see.
are, if you are trying to get people off the black market, I think
So
you
that's
have
what
to
was the
include
point.
that because
The point I was going to make is if
people will go back and forth then.
Yeah, or they
just stay
won't,
with the
right?
black
They're
market.
just going to
Yeah.
stay. They're going
They'll
to
stay with
just
black
stay in the black market because they want to have all their activity in one place. And so, if you're thinking about carving it out, like you are, even if you've got untethered mobile, free access mobile, you are going to keep a large portion of the illegal market in the illegal market by carving that out. And on the integrity point, again, was made like integrity should be getting better with legalization, right? Like we're part of SWIMA in New Jersey. Like we're all working together to share the data. Like the NCAA is going to need to realize that by partnering and working with legal operators and combating and moving people out of the illegal market, you are ultimately going to make integrity safer for the sport.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. What a great event. Thank you for attending. Thanks for the amazing speakers. Charlie, great keynote. And we will have a reception right down there. If you walk out of here, you go down a flight of steps, there will be a reception right there. Thank you for making the trip to our school. We hope you enjoy it. We hope to see you again back at our school. We have a lot of great events, not always about sports betting, but there are other events that may be of interest. Thank you quite a bit. Thanks. Hey, thank you all. That was fantastic. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, it's fun.
Great meeting you. Dan, I know. Do you want to?